Chapter 24. Finding a different way. After the ruckus last night, no one in Wukong's sword sect got a good night of sleep. In comparison to the other disciples who had gathered together to excitedly discuss, Zhuai Mo was frightened awake. Right now, he was on the same boat as Pu Yao. When he saw the snow dragon, his brain had exploded. Before, he still had a delusion, but now his heart was restless. His heart nervous. If he wasn't extremely fond of this place, he would instantly pack his things and escape without a trace. After being scared witless for a few days and seeing that nothing had happened, his heart finally landed back above his stomach. Wei Xingxixiang was thrust into the limelight this time. In the area around Dongfu, the news that a genius of Wukong's sword sect appeared out of the blue, the sword energy piercing the heavens when he entered Juji, instantly made a buzz. As expected, Wei Xingxixiang quickly was taken by the sect head as his disciple, personally bestowing down a 4th-grade flying sword, splitting rainbow, and the person teaching him however was Xin Yen Shishu. When the previous inner sect disciples had received their swords, it had all been 3rd-grade flying swords. Even the most talented Luo Li Shixiang wasn't an exception. Such favor, it was the first time for Wukong's sword sect. And the one who received the sword had been an outer sect disciple previously. When all the outer sect disciples discussed this matter, they all had proud expressions on their faces. But even more was envy that was unable to be hidden. An outer sect disciple that once was a sword servant, skyrocketing to become the most valued 2nd-generation disciple, Wei Xingxixiang's experience was almost every outer sect disciple's dream. Other than more admiration, Zhuai Mo wasn't shocked. He believed that anyone who had seen that jade stick that he had would be just as clam as he was. He admired, but he would not copy Wei Xingxixiang. He didn't have that obsession inside. Fundamentally, he was a lazy person. He was working hard now just so that he could be lazy in the future. Pu Yao also seemed to have recovered. Just like usual, he sat on the gravestone and listened to the sound tablet. The sea of consciousness hadn't changed, except that the flames seemed bigger. Zhuai Mo didn't know if it was just his imagination. In any case, it was just a patch of red. The agitated Wukong mountain finally calmed down. Zhuai Mo's life also calmed down. What he reminisced about the most was the life he had before all the apprehension and worry. His life returning to normal, his heart became much peaceful. However, he met trouble. A ling plant farmer required 3 kinds of spells to reach the 3rd level. Zhuai Mo's little art of cloud and rain was at the 4th level. Right now, the one that he had that was most likely to reach the 3rd level was art of aged gold. He even knew how to break through to the 3rd level of art of aged gold. Using sword scriptures to manipulate the aged gold energy was the crucial factor. It was the method that Pu Yao had pointed out that day for him to kill the silver-horned worms. This road also proved his previous hypothesis that art of aged gold was a certain kind of offensive spell. But Zhuai Mo wasn't dumb. He detected the fishiness. If he walked down this road, then he needed to strengthen his consciousness. The aged gold sword wasn't really a sword. If he didn't have the spiritual power, he couldn't manipulate it. He experienced that deeply when he exterminated the silver-horned worms this time. If his spiritual power had been greater, then the power of the little aged gold sword definitely would have multiplied. If it moved according to his wishes, the sword moves also would be able to unleash their full power. Strengthening his consciousness, then he would have to face a problem, practicing embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. No wonder Pu Yao had been so generous. He was waiting there. Originally Zhuai Mo, who had been irritated at not finding a way to elevate his art of aged gold, was now having a headache because he could not level up. Hesitating for a long while, in the end he still decided not to raise his art of aged gold. Didn't a ling plants farmer need 3 kinds of spells to reach the 3rd level? At the very worst, he'll pick 2 others from the remaining 3 spells. Art of Flora, Art of Crimson Flame, and Art of Earth Energy. He had practiced them all to the second level. But no matter which two, he had only just arrived at the second level. It was far from entering the third. Originally, Art of Aged Gold had been the only he had the greatest confidence in reaching the third level, but now he had to put it to one side. He really was depressed. Thankfully he still had Jingshi on his hands. At the worst, he could go search to see if there was any jade sticks related to this area that was being sold. The jade stick that he had brought before was just a normal one. It described all 5 spells, but in most places, it just brushed over, and a direction could barely be found. For the majority, it still needed him to comprehend for himself. Most of the jade sticks that were on the market were this version. The true premium ones were with the large sections. Even when it wandered onto the market, it was extremely expensive. In some of the top sects, before each shoujo died, they would use their consciousness to leave behind what they had learned in their lives in the jade sticks and pass them on. These were the highest jade sticks. The jade sticks that held the consciousness and understandings of the elders were distributed to the disciples in the sect with the greatest potential. These young disciples would change themselves in one night, greatly shortening the time they needed to spend cultivating. But for normal shoujo, they didn't even need to think about this kind of things. It was better to walk step by step. Not just that, it was like they were on a dangerous and misty mountain road, carefully climbing up. As to whether they would walk an indirect route, fall and break into pieces, that depended on each individual's luck. Adding on the 20 pieces of second-grade Jingshi that Li Yingfeng gave, Suomo's wealth was the greatest it had ever been, even though Pu Yao had spent a large amount. Suomo couldn't help but sigh, even though everyone was cultivating, but of those that were outstanding, how many didn't have anything to their name? Li Yingfeng Shiji's family was wealthy. Giving out tens of second-grade Jingshi, her eyes didn't even blink. This kind of manner, Suomo was deeply envious. His pouch was fat, his cultivation was hindered, it was natural that Suomo thought about using Jingshi to solve the problem. His goal this time was to buy a jade stick about one spell. There were very few people who could practice all 5 kinds of spells at the same time. But there should be more people who were skilled in 1 or 2 types. This kind of spells definitely wouldn't be cheap. He would probably bleed a lot this time, but he had no other choice. Riding the creaking Xiao Huang, he slowly made his way to Dongfu again. As one of the most important towns of Tianyujia, the development of Dongfu was very good and had attracted a wave of pretty good shoujo. Basically, all the normal requirements could be satisfied here, especially to the kind of lianqi cultivators such as Suomo. In a moderately sized store, Suomo's body was almost lying on the desk, his eyes unblinking as he stared at the other. Bro, I'm saying, just buy another one, it's really not expensive. If you want to fix it, and add more Ling energy, it wouldn't be cheaper than buying a new one, and it can't level up. The person was holding Suomo's flying paper crane, Xiao Huang, as he said in a seasoned tone. Looking at the visible cracks on the paper crane, Suomo was slightly unwilling. After all, this was his first steed. Gritting his teeth, he said, just fix it for me, naturally I wouldn't give less for the cost. The other shrugged indifferently, whatever you say. He took out all kinds of tools. First he cut out several lengths of green thin bamboo to reinforce the skeleton. Then he glued the cracks in the yellow paper, cutting off the frayed edges. He took out a brush, using cinnabar to carefully mend the seal arrangement before adding in Ling energy. Only when the red cinnabar had disappeared from the surface of the paper crane did he repeatedly put on a layer of liquid, and the seal that had disappeared appeared once again. All right. I slightly made it stronger. If you're careful, you can still use it for a while. 3 pieces of second-grade Jingshi. As expected, the price wasn't different from buying a new one. Suomo's heart jerked in pain, but he still crisply paid. Walking out of the small store, he stared to walk to the free market and found Fu Jin. Fu Jin saw Suomo and instantly became alert, yellow, "Hey, Moge's here. What do you want this time?" The wily eyes found the copper ring on Zhuo Mo's hand. Instantly he became even more attentive. His eyes were very experienced. That was a talisman. Even if the grade wasn't high, but it still meant that Zhuo Mo definitely still had some jingsha in his hands. Zhuo Mo asked, "Do you have anything about Art of Flora? Relating to the third level? Art of Crimson Flame, or Art of Earth Energy, would also do." The third level? Fu Jin grimaced as he shook his head. Moge. You know the market. Whatever spell, once it reaches the third level, it isn't hard to find. Even if it was available, the price, TSK, at least 2 pieces of third-grade jingsha. 2 pieces of third-grade jingsha. Zhuo Mo didn't know what to say about the price. Even though he was much wealthier now, but this price was still out of reach for him. 1 piece of third-grade jingsha, it needed 100 pieces of second-grade jingsha. This was only for low-grade jingsha. As the grade increased, the disparity in the exchange rate would become even greater. Like 4th-grade jingsha, at the very least, it would require 500 pieces of third-grade jingsha. Third grade was a dividing line. If he could make spellwork jade sticks, Zhuo Mo would have already been selling jade sticks. Disregarding everything else, just based on his 4th level of Little Art of Cloud and Rain, if he could make jade sticks, he definitely could sell it for a good price. It was a pity that making a spellwork jade stick wasn't a simple matter. While Zhuo Mo's Little Art of Cloud and Rain might have reached the 4th level, but for the overwhelming majority of the profound parts, he could only grasp, but could not convey. Like the jade stick that Wei Xing Shixiang gave him. It only basically recorded some of his experiences and realizations. It couldn't be considered a spellwork jade stick. Those that could make spellwork jade sticks, they were usually those of high cultivation. They could stand at a higher spot and penetrate through to the core of the spells. The spellwork jade sticks that a Jindan Shouja made, and one that a Ningmai made, the price was astronomically different. The Ling plant jade stick that Zhuo Mo brought had been made by a Ningmai. Many of the part inside were not adequately described. The most common spellwork jade sticks on the market were for the stage of Zhuji. They frequently could get sold for a pretty good price. Since once one entered Zhuji, they had some wealth. This was also the reason that why the spellwork jade sticks for Lianqi cultivators were so rare. The majority of those in the stage of Lianqi were poor bastards. And Tianyujie, it was a district under the jurisdiction of Kunlun Jing. The mainstream was Sword Xiu, so there was much less spells in the other areas. Zhuo Mo couldn't help but be disappointed. Even though Zhuo Mo's face was paralyzed, but Fu Jin still sensitively detected his disappointed. He thought before suggesting, Moge could try taking a look at the notice altar. Zhuo Mo instantly hit his head in frustration. How could he have forgotten that place? Each sect would always encounter all sorts of problems. Like the strange disease of the Ling fields that Wukong Sword sect had encountered this time. If the sect could not solve it, they would post to the boards in hopes of those with extraordinary talent that could aid them through their difficulties. After that, everyone found the convenience inside and more people asked for aid at the boards. Consequently, they created a specialized temple to post notices which was called the notice altar. This also became the place many Shouja used to find jobs, especially those with a cultivation of Lianqi or Zhuji. Of course, posting a message required paying a fee, and the post would clearly state the payment. Gratefully giving thanks to Fu Jin, Zhuo Mo started heading for the notice altar. Chapter 25 Fourth Shigu. The notice altar was in the southern part of Dongfu, and it was also the most prosperous and busiest part of Dongfu. Because he had already joined a sect, and taking care of the Ling fields and cultivation had taken up almost all of his time, Zhuo Mo had never been to the notice altar before. This was why he hadn't thought of this place at the beginning. Stopping at the notice altar, he couldn't help but inhale sharply. Looking out, countless posts made from cloth banners pointed at the sky like a forest, spreading out into the horizon. Under each banner, people's heads moved. The stream of people also moved slowly. Zhuemo was in awe at the scene. Dazedly, he followed the stream and entered the notice altar. This sect has a pair of fiery gold eyes beast pups, requires 1 zookeeper. Requires cultivation above intermediate level of Zhuji, 5 or more years of experience in animal care, salary generous. This sect is clearing out Ling fields, needs large number of body cultivators, above Lianqi 5th level. Includes residence and food. 10 pieces of first-grade Jingshi each day. In just a quick while, Zhuomo's eyes started to blur. Just at this time, someone came up, "Bro, what, it's hard to search. I have the complete table of content for the entire notice altar, detailed and accurate. It is updated at the first time. How about it, do you want a copy?" "How much?" Zhuemo asked cautiously. "Not expensive, 20 pieces of first-grade Jingshi." The person said, "Bro, at one look, I can see you are one for doing big things. Time is so precious, wasting it like this is not worthy. Just 20 pieces of first-grade Jingshi, it's really worthwhile." 8 pieces. "Bro, look at all these notices. Just me alone, how can I collect all of them? I have to support an entire bunch of people, adding on 2 pieces, I'm very sincere." "Bro, we don't have it easy." Zhuemo turned to leave. The person hurriedly pulled Zhuemo, Okay, I'll sell it to you at a loss." Looking at the directory that he spent 10 pieces of first-grade Jingshi to buy, Zhuemo was a sorry figure as he escaped from the notice altar. He found a less busy place nearby and sat down. That was a really scary place. He looked with trepidation at the bustling notice altar. Adding Ling energy to the jade stick, there were more than 1,500 posts in the directory, a huge variety, everything was there. After a long time, Zhuemo finally found an order and started to look down. After a full 2 hours, he finally raised his head, his eyes full of disappointment. It wasn't that there weren't related posts that paid with spells, but not one of them were something that he could accomplish. Thinking about it now, Fu Jing was right. When any spell reached the 3rd level, the price also changed drastically. Discontentedly returning on the flying paper crane, Zhuomo's expression was blank. When he returned home and saw Wei Xingxixiang standing outside his door, he couldn't help but blank. Wei Xingxixiang didn't seem to have changed much from before. Still clad in rough cloth. Even though he still gave others the feeling of being as sharp as a sword, but it was much more restrained than before. It could be seen that Wei Xingxixiang's cultivation was much deeper than before. Even when Zhuemo was still far away, he already detected it. "Shitty has really made me wait." He smiled as he greeted. Wei Xingxixiang's warmth that was just like before made Zhuemo very surprised and slightly moved. The attitudes of inner sect disciples towards outer sect disciples were usually extremely bad, and those of low birth and had an accomplished cultivation, their arrogant manner was the normal state. "If Xixiang has something, just send a notice, why wait so long outside the door?" Zhuemo solemnly replied. Wei Xing took out a small box from his bosom and handed it to Zhuemo. "The fire dragon grass seed won't be of any use in my hands, but at least it's 3rd grade, so it would be a pity to throw it out. Shitty is skilled in planting, so this is given to Shitty." Zhuemo was greedy about wealth, but facing the little box, he didn't hold out his hand. The seed of a 3rd grade fire dragon grass, it wasn't a question to sell it for a few tens of pieces of 2nd grade Jingshi. Xixiang has successfully Zhuji, and there would be many places that would require Jingshi in the future. Wei Xing interrupted his words, shoving the wooden box into Zhuomo's chest. "Don't be chatty. I'm telling you to take it. My heart is for the sword, and doesn't like other things." Holding the wooden box, Zhuemo didn't know what to say. Shitty has outstanding talent and should work hard to not fail to live up to this good vessel. He urged, "Very soon I will enter the sword cave to study. When I come out, Shidi should have successfully Zhuji. For some reason, Suomo's heart warmed and burst out, I definitely will successfully Zhuji. Then I won't worry anymore. It's a pity that Shidi isn't interested in the sword. There was a hint of pity in Wei Xing's expression. Suomo smiled, it isn't bad being a ling plant farmer, Jingxiai is a very dependable thing. Ha! Wei Xing roared with laughter, that's so true. I won't bid farewell. When I come out, us brothers will drink. Finishing, he swept away. Even when Wei Xing Shixiang had walked a long ways off, Suomo's heart was still slightly excited. No matter if Wei Xing Shixiang was deliberate or not, but this bit of solicitude, he would firmly remember. From when he opened his eyes, what he faced was a completely unfamiliar world. The sect leader that picked him up had asked a few words before he was never seen again. He was like a newborn baby that started to dumbly learn bit by bit everything in the surroundings. His strange zombie face, and the ignorance about the affairs of the world caused him to receive endless mockery and ridicule. The only thing he was glad about was that the heavens had left behind some assets for him, the cultivation of Lianqi 5th level. The setbacks he endured everywhere didn't make him sink but actually stirred up the stubbornness in his bones. He cultivated day and night, used the rain of, little art of cloud and rain, to fill the dry pond drop by drop. After that, the treatment he received gradually changed. Piling on the insincerity and worldliness, deliberately getting close to the other disciples in the sect, and earning a pretty good reputation. But that alienation inside, it gradually deepened with time. Wei Xing Shixiang, who he only had met 2 times before, it was the first time he felt a sincere concern. Before this, he wasn't interested in Zhuji. That astounding sword essence in his sea of consciousness, while it had stirred up some interest and power, but quickly, embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, had completely made him lose interest in power. For him, power was undoubtedly very far away. But Wei Xing Shixiang's exhortations today made him suddenly feel that he needed to Zhuji. This feeling was so fierce, from the moment it left his mouth, he felt that, no matter what, he had to complete Zhuji. Zhuji. Zhuji, it was the first barrier in the long journey of cultivation. For those disciples in the large sects, Zhuji was so easy that it was like stepping over a doorstep. But for normal Xiuzhi, this would decide their status. Those that were in the stage of Zhuji basically had left behind the lowest level of work, their income enough for those as greedy as Suomo to have red eyes. But there was a high degree of difficulty in Zhuji, especially to someone like Suomo who only had the kind of mainstream street trash like 10 Principles scripture. To finish Zhuji, it needed luck and character. Other than that, the success of Zhuji depended on whether the wallet was full or not. The Ling Dan and Ling herbs that were required for Zhuji, not one of them was cheap. And the effects varied greatly. Normal Zhuji Dan, it generally was 100 pieces of second-grade Jingshi. But this kind of Zhuji Dan could only be considered to barely usable. And if one was willing to spill some blood, 2 pieces of third-grade Jingshi, they could buy the highest grade of Zhuji Dan, the success rate multiplying. This was also why the disciples of the large sects didn't care about Zhuji. For them, 2 pieces of third-grade Jingshi was really a small amount. But for Suomo, 100 pieces of second-grade Jingshi was almost his entire wealth. And this was only because his income had been high lately. Before this, did he dare to even think? That was also why he would put his efforts on Ling plant farmer. In reality, the difficulty of becoming a Ling plant farmer was much higher than Zhuji. This could be seen from how much the salary of a Ling plant farmer surpassed a Zhuji cultivator. But the difficulty was based on talent. There wasn't much of a Jingshi investment. What other than this was more perfect for a money-grubbing Suomo? But now he wanted to Zhuji. His brain was occupied with this though as he dumbly walked to Cold Mist Valley. Who are you? How dare you enter this sect's important lands? Suddenly a cold shout broke through Suomo's thoughts. A matron, appearing about 40-something years old, was standing in the medicine fields, coldly looking at Swa-mo. Swa-mo unconsciously raised his head. When he met the other's eyes, he instantly dropped into ice. The other's gaze was as sharp as a sword, almost piercing him through. Swa-mo shook, as though waking from a dream, his mind whirling quickly. He hurriedly made the bow of a disciple. This disciple is Swa-mo received Hao Min Shiji's orders to temporarily care for the medicine fields here. That girl dares to be lazy. The green-clad matron's face was cold, hinting at the anger. Swa-mo silently grimaced. Right now, he largely knew the identity of this elder in front of him. Wukong's sword sect hadn't been big to begin with. The only one that fit the description was the fourth Shirgu, Shifeng Rong. Shifeng Rong spent long periods of time traveling abroad, occasionally returning. Swa-mo had never had the chance to see her before. But supposedly this Shirgu didn't have a good temper, was hard to be close with. Looking at it now, it was true. His only hope now was that fourth Shirgu wouldn't blame him. Hao Min Shiji was an inner sect disciple. Even if she was punished, it wouldn't be heavy. But his status was low. If he was blamed, he wouldn't have a good ending. Shifeng Rong scanned the medicine fields in the surroundings. Seeing the ling herbs were fine, the coldness on her face retreated slightly. She relaxed her tone to ask, "What are you called?" Disciple Swa-mo greets fourth Shirgu. Swa-mo answered respectfully. Your care isn't bad. Glancing at Swa-mo, her eyes held praise, cultivation of Lianqi 8th level. And, can be considered ambitious. From today onwards, Cold Mist Valley is under your care. Humph, when Hao Min returns, I will sort her out. Temporary worker turning to actual worker, Swa-mo wasn't very 100 times unwilling, but facing fourth Shirgu's gaze that could cut him up, he perceptively swallowed the words back into his stomach. Inside, he muttered, fourth Shirgu was the same as Xian Yen Shishu, they looked at everyone like the others owed them money. This Zhuji Dan, it is your reward. Swa-mo stared with bright eyes at the Zhuji Dan in his hands. The 100 times unwilling instantly became 100 times willing. As expected, it was Shirgu Wood was considerate. He praised fourth Shirgu effusively inside. The most basic Zhuji Dan was 100 pieces of second-grade jingsha. He had heard that this Shirgu was skilled at concocting pills, but he didn't know what grade this Zhuji Dan was. Keep cultivating, and enter Zhuji. Your power now, to care for Cold Mist Valley, it isn't enough. Fourth Shirgu's icy voice rang in Swa-mo's ears. Swa-mo, already drowning in joy, hurriedly responded. Shifeng Rong was going to leave when her eyes glanced at Swa-mo's face. Her steps instantly stopped, an astounded expression floating on her cold face. Raise your head. Chapter 26 Appearance changed and mind erased. Swa-mo raised his head. Shifeng Rong walked gracefully in front of him. Carefully examining for a few seconds, her brows suddenly furrowed. You are the child that sect leader Shixiang picked up. Swa-mo blanked, nodding and answered, yes. You cannot remember anything from before. Swa-mo's heart suddenly started to beat furiously, blood rushing up to his head. He felt that he was trembling, his entire body uncontrollably trembling lightly. He heard his trembling voice answer, yes. Oh. Shifeng Rong nodded. She hadn't planned on saying anything, turning to leave. Swa-mo almost unconsciously yelled, Shirgu. Shifeng Rong stopped, expression irritated as she looked at him. Swa-mo didn't know where he got the courage to intently stare at Shifeng Rong, eyes full of terror and hope. This disciple has nothing left of the previous memories. What this disciple is called, who are the parents, nothing. Thinking about it every time, the heart is grievously sad, and begs for Shirgu's guidance. Shifeng Rong looked at Swa-mo for a beat and shook her head. For you, it's better not to know. Please, Shirgu, complete this desire. Swa-mo almost used up all the strength in his body. Shi Fengrong slightly wrinkled her brows, coldly stating, "Since you want to know so much, then I will tell you. If I hadn't seen it wrong, you might have been the target of a technique to have your features changed. Someone had changed your appearance." "Changed," Zuemo muttered to himself absent-mindedly. "As to your previous memories, it should have been erased by someone. I don't know who has such deep enmity against you." Finishing, she gave a look deep with meaning at Zuemo. "Changing your appearance or erasing a mind, it all needs great cultivation. You should just obediently take care of the Ling fields for me." It was as though Zuemo was struck by lightning and frozen to his spot. When his mind slowly came back, the sky was dark and Fourth Shirgu had left long ago. Zuemo was muddle-headed, his eyes bleak. Changed appearance, erased mind. So his memory had been erased by someone, so his face had been changed. So that dream. Why? Why was it like this? He lowered his head, his fists unconsciously cleaning, knuckles cracking, fingertips white. The bamboo-like body was like a dry stalk of grass waving in the wind, small and weak. The temperature of Cold Mist Valley in the night time was extremely low, humidity high. Small tendrils of cold permeated into Zuemo's body, and also into his heart. The puzzle that had perplexed him finally had been solved at this time, but even more puzzles were lying in front of him. Who am I? Who did it? The messy mind instantly quieted. Zuemo raised his head, his eyes as though they were dyed by blood, a patch of red. He had expected that he would be furious, would shout. But he didn't. His heart was encased in ice, as though he was an outsider watching from the sidelines. His heart was an iced body. Under the thick layer of ice, a vague hint could be seen to the undercurrents roiling in the deep. Fourth Shirgu's words echoed in his ears. Someone that even Fourth Shirgu would call of high cultivation, at the very least, one of their hairs would be thicker than his leg. Even if he wanted to settle a score, he couldn't manage it. Suddenly everything in these 2 years, sunlight, Ling grains, it was like a dream and an invisible great hand forcibly squeezed it to dust. It was gone. He relaxed his fingers, stepping in the sea of consciousness where the flames were dancing. Just like normal, Pu Yao was still sitting on the gravestone shrouded in black smoke. Seeing Zuemo, the corner of his mouth rose. Ha 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 ha. Reckless and crazy laughter rang out in the sea of consciousness. Wei Xing closely followed behind the sect leader and Xian Yen Shishu as they walked in the back of the mountain. The two elders were both extremely solemn as they silently walked at the front. Wei Xing was also cautious as he closely followed. This was a forbidden area of the sect. Master and Xian Yen Shishu had cast more than 20 spells on the way here to open the path. It could be seen just how guarded this place was. He had just entered Juji, his willpower 10 times what it had been previously, but the pressure that the Jinji exuded, it still made him feel as though he was suffocating. So the sect had a place as strong as this. He felt his blood was gradually warming up, he was full of hopes to the sword cave that they were going to arrive at. After walking for 4 hours, the three finally stopped in front of the mouth of a cave. Nervousness came upon both Pei Yuan Ran and Xian Yan's face. The sect leader Pei Yuan Ran said solemnly, "This sword cave, it had been created by this sect's first leader. It was used for the sect disciples to refine their sword essences. Only disciples below Jindan can enter." Some shame suddenly made its way across his face, the ancestors' power was astounding. To open this sword cave, it requires 2 Jindan to simultaneously act. This sect has declined. In the generation above us, there was only 1 Jindan, so this sword cave was never opened. I and your Shishu practiced our sword essences by ourselves in Yao Hunt. When we reached Jindan, we could not go in. What is actually in this sword cave, we don't know either. You have to explore for yourself. Wei Xing listened closely, his expression calm. Pei Yuan Ran looked at his disciple, concern in his eyes. Every 10 days, we will prepare enough Ling food for you. Right now, your fourth Shirgu has returned and you don't have to worry about herbs and Dan. But the sword cave is dangerous and you need to remember your own safety. You have just entered Juji and your cultivation is low, so in reality, you are not suited to enter the sword cave. But you have immense talent on the sword that we have never seen before. To not hinder you, we have decided to make an exception and let you enter the sword cave. If you encounter any danger, you need to leave the sword cave immediately. The last warning, Pei Yuan Ran couldn't help raising his voice. This sincere and honest disciple in front of him, his talent was astounding and surpassed all of their expectations. He seemed to have been born a sword shield. Other than his cultivation that needed to steadily progress, any sword scripture that entered his hands would quickly become familiar and flowing. Even the strongest Xian Yen was shocked at Wei Xing's progress. Other than joy, they couldn't help but be worried. Such a good piece of jade, if they didn't nurture properly, wouldn't it disappoint the ancestors? They had pondered for a long time and in the end, decided to open the sword cave. Other than the legend about the sword cave in the sect, they hoped that Wei Xing could practice the complete void sword. Void sword was the strongest sword scripture of the sect and the greatest accomplishment of the first ancestral master, Wukong Jinren. But when it came to their generation, they didn't have a complete, void sword scripture. Like Xian Yan's, Ice Dragon sword scripture, it had been created by one of the ancestral masters but was not the strongest sword scripture of the sect. Before, they had put their hopes on Luo Li who only managed to achieve empty sword. Who could have thought that he, who had once been Luo Li's sword servant, would have even greater talent than Luo Li? Even more, while Luo Li had outstanding talent but his personality was arrogant. Compared to the honest and humble Wei Xing, he was quickly defeated. In their hearts, Wei Xing was the present and uncontested head of the disciples. Disciple understands. Wei Xing's expression was grave. Pei Yuan Ran and Xian Yen exchanged a lot and nodded their heads. Both started to revolve their Ling energy, casting a spell. Two Jindan undertaking a task at the same time, the commotion was extremely alarming. Over their heads, clouds gathered from every direction. In a few blinks of an eye, the small mountain valley was shrouded by roiling black clouds, dark as night. On the outside wall of the mountain cave, countless seals started to light up and flash. The Jinji in the surroundings also lit up, countless seals floating midair as though they were communicating with the seals that were carved into the mountain. Feeling the shock and shivering that came from the bones, Wei Xing's calm gaze seemed to have been ignited and he excitedly went forward. Pei Yuan Ran and Xian Yan's expressions were grave. Both of them simultaneously shouted, "Open!" The seals turned and the formation changed. The mountain cave suddenly became dark and deep, as though it was a void. Wei Xing, who had already prepared, didn't hesitate and rushed in. At this time, Pei Yuan Ran and Xian Yen finally gave a breath of relief. The two slowly let go of the spell, dispersing the Ling energy on their hands. The seals on the mountain and on the Jinji slowly faded. The thick clouds overhead spread out, sunlight once again reaching the valley. "Let's go, he needs to walk the road himself." Pei Yuan Ran sighed. Of course. Xian Yen treated words like they were gold. In the sea of fire, Zhuai Mo sat not far away from Pu Yao, listening attentively. What is Yaomo? There are many ways of distinguishing but the most important is the method of cultivation. Xiuzhe, extract the Ling energy of the world to use for themselves. What they cultivate is Ling energy. And Yao, what they care about is the spirit shaking the sky, primarily cultivating the spirit. And Mo. That group of people whose absolute majority is stupid to the point of no return can only cultivate themselves, using their bodies as talismans. Mo seemed to understand but didn't really understand. Oh, all of this is nonsense. Okay, we'll talk something practical. Your road wasn't wrong to use sword moves to manipulate the aged gold energy. However, it is a pity that you aren't your Shixiang. Based on your speed, I estimate it would be at least 2 to 3 years. Pu Yao suddenly smiled strangely, revealing half of his crimson tongue, but I have a quick fix. Do you want to try? Quick fix. Zhuo Mo's eyes were lit up, his body slightly leaning forward. Pu Yao's eyes narrowed even more, his voice full of enticement. Exactly, very fast. Within 1 month, you definitely would break to the 3rd level of Art of Aged Gold. Really? Zhuo Mo was slightly suspicious. Pu Yao's expression gave him a bad feeling. You won't know until you try. Pu Yao shrugged his shoulders. There isn't a free lunch in the world. To get power, how can you not pay? Zhuo Mo fell silent. To find the answers, to find the person that changed him, he needed power, desperately needed power. Pu Yao wasn't wrong. To get power, it required a certain cost. He was a little Xiuzhe who hadn't even entered Juji. What could he rely on to find the answer? The only one he could ask aid from was Pu Yao. He still didn't know what Pu Yao wanted, but did he have a choice? Choices were a question that only those that were strong would face. What he was glad about was that Pu Yao was willing to help him. Regardless of Pu Yao's reasons for doing so, he would accept it. All right. He stood up. Pu Yao's blade-like mouth once again skewed towards one side. He laughed lightly, declaring, "Ha, what is more simpler than sword scriptures? After being sliced a few thousand times, you'll learn it." The words hadn't landed and a vast snow-white sword essence came down from the heavens, easily slicing Zhuo Mo's consciousness in half. A heart-wrenching pain came on. Zhuo Mo felt that his body had been cut into 2 halves. The pain came on and he straightforwardly fainted. Chapter 27 Looking up in the darkness, Xixiang, is your body ill? Xiaoguo had fought for a long time but couldn't resist asking. It's nothing. Zhuo Mo's voice was raspy as he replied and continued to walk forward. Xiaoguo looked worriedly at Zhuo Mo, gathering her courage to state, "Xixiang, if you don't feel well, we could change to another day." I said it's fine, so it's fine. Zhuo Mo glared at Xiaoguo. Xiaoguo couldn't help but shrink back. She muttered, "But, Shixji said the body is the most important." Zhuo Mo decided to shut up himself and not argue with this little girl. He didn't have the energy. Anyone that would have been sliced over and over in half by the sword essence of a Jindan definitely wouldn't have the energy. Pu Yao was insane. Certifiably insane. Xin Yen Shishu's sword essence far surpassed what he could endure. Each time that he faced the vast snow-white sword essence, he felt that he was at death's door. The terror that seemed to come from the deepest part of his heart made him tremble. The difference between the two of them was too large, so large it didn't have meaning. Even this terror that seemed to happen right before death, Zhuo Mo would only have a short instant to feel it before his consciousness would be easily cut in half. His only outcome was fainting. But he would quickly wake up because of pain. The enormous pain due to his wounded spirit would wake him up. The only thing he could do was grit his teeth and practice embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. Only that thing could heal his spirit and lessen the pain. Before he could take a breath, another sword essence would drop down from heaven and he would faint again. Just like that. Slice, faint, wake up due to the pain, continuously repeating. In one day, he would faint a few dozen times. One could imagine, how could his state be good? If he had the time, he would be suspicious of himself of being able to endure to that day. However, Pu Yao wouldn't even give that amount of time to him. Later on, the pain turned to numbness. Only when Xiaoguo came to find him did Pu Yao temporarily let him go. Xiaoguo came to find him to take a look at the Ling grasses. After the wheat incident, all the girls on the eastern peak were scared. Li Yingfeng became an inner sect disciple, entering Yan Li's doors. Other than cultivating, she had to follow her master to learn how to take care of the sect's assets and had no time to come to the eastern peak. But they girls still remembered zombie Xixiang Zhuo Mo, and before Li Yingfeng left, she had especially given notice with him in hopes he could help these female disciples. After a certain amount of time, they would always pull Zuo over to inspect the Ling grass. There weren't any big problems with the Ling grass, other than some problems that would occur due to improper care. For Zuo, who planted Ling grains, these were all simple problems. Most of the attention of the female disciples was on the Ling beasts. Planting Ling grass was only to provide food for the Ling beast, so they did not put much attention and care into the grass. Looking at the Ling fields being wasted, Zuo felt pain. If all of these Ling fields were planted with Ling grains, think how much jingshe there would be. Shi Xiang, these little things aren't worth much but are a token of our thanks. Please accept them. A female disciple handed over the gifts that they had prepared beforehand. He understood the intentions of these female disciples. No matter where, female disciples were always more vulnerable, especially the kind of outer sect female disciples. Li Yingfeng had left, and had no time to spare to look after them. They needed someone with the power to protect them. It wasn't surprising. Most of the female disciples' cultivations were around level 5 or 6 of Lianqi, and no one was able to pick up the burden. Zuo thought for a second but accepted the gifts. Even if this matter was slightly troublesome, but if they really encountered something serious, he believed that Li Yingfeng definitely would get involved. Seeing Zuo take the gift, the crowd of female disciples gave relieved expressions. Everyone had a hard time surviving, Zuo thought silently. Returning home, he opened the gift box. Inside were all kinds of Ling worms and Ling beasts. Similar to mud-turning earthworms, they would even enter a grade. A large majority were first grade, and there were only 1 or 2 at the second grade. But it could be seen that they had taken some care with the Ling worms and animals. Even if the grade wasn't high, but they were all quite useful. Pu Yao suddenly erupted, crouching in front of the Ling worms and beasts, talking of playing with worms. TSK, us Yaoma is the true masters in this area. He randomly flipped through the Ling worms, extremely disappointed. All of these are low level, not worth much. Zuo was extremely speechless but couldn't resist objecting. They are outer sect disciples, where would they get high level ones? Pu Yao nipped one up and examined it for a long while. Then he carelessly threw it in front of Zuo. Here, this one is barely acceptable. Throw out all the others. The one Pu Yao picked was a black armored worm, slightly larger than a fingernail. He flipped through the jade stick that they had also given to find out that this black armored worm was called black gold worm, fond of eating gold metal. Its wings could be sold for a pretty good price. Other than that, supposedly it could also be used to find sources of water. Zuo was slightly disappointed. To him, the black gold worm didn't have much use. Pu Yao's interests clearly had been evoked by these worms. He excitedly said, playing with worms, there's a lot to attend to. Especially the techniques, they vary by person. Before, I saw one highly skilled with worms, called Blood Mosquito Daoren. This guy was very strong. Somehow, he managed to create countless souls, and bound them to a group of blood mosquitoes. And then he traveled through 100 jia. Every time he reached a jia, he would leave behind a few blood mosquitoes. His enemies had a whole bunch of people and pursued him countless times but still couldn't kill him. I played with black gold worms before too, but it isn't this kind of cheap trash. There isn't much use in the level ones. This thing's true purpose is to use it to seek out Ling veins. Ling veins? Zuo asked suspiciously, isn't it used to seek out water? Water? Pu Yao sneered, retorting, if you don't know, then don't pretend. That's for low-level black gold worms. Black gold worms above 4th grade can seek out Ling veins, 7th grade is able to find Ling sources. But 9th grade is the truly good stuff. As to 10th grade, I've never seen one. He continued to explain, picking Ling worms, definitely have to pick those with good aptitudes. Like this black gold worm of yours, if you raise it correctly, it can enter 4th grade. These other ones, it doesn't even have the chance to increase to 3rd grade. Then, how can this black gold worm raise to grade 4? Suemo consulted with a fawning tone. 4th grade black gold worms could find ling veins. This was endlessly tempting to Suemo. This time, Puyao didn't make it difficult for him. He briskly said, very simple. Don't you have a small section of ling vein in your seclusion room? Put this black gold worm and a piece of pure gold ore in a jade box and bury it in the area surrounding the ling vein. After a month, it should increase to the 3rd level. To get it to the 4th level, it probably would take about 3 months. Alright, let us continue. Puyao waved his hand and said impatiently. Before his words landed, a snow-white sword essence once again cleaved Suemo's mind in half. Suemo, who had been memorizing what Puyao just said, instantly fainted. After an unknown amount of time, sharp pain once again woke Suemo up. Suemo's first thought was, did he remember the method of raising the black gold worm to the 4th grade? Great, he remembered. So painful. He couldn't help but start to wail, rolling on the ground. Why did it become painful? The tearing pain tortured his fragile nerves. He could only start embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. A ball of air moved continuously through his body, giving out cold stands, seeming to inhale through all the openings in his body and then spreading through the body. The flames waved in his sea of consciousness. That dim star in the void seemed to have become much brighter. The enchanting sea of flames could not take away its light. Fainting, waking with pain, fainting again, waking up with pain again. The amount of time that Suemo had to comprehend was extremely short. After repeating for a few hundred times, he still endured. Pain is the tastiest thing in this world. You have to finally savor it, enjoy it, the flavor fresh and sweet as it permeates your marrow. Even your soul is trembling. Puyao stuck out his bright red tongue, licking his lips and slowly said, death is like a firework. You can continuously experience the process of blossoming. How lucky you are. Damned Renyao. Suemo recited in his mouth. However, his eyes were open to the widest, unwaveringly staring at that lightning-fast snow-white sword essence. He knew that the kind of pain that was coming. Just like Puyao had said, his soul was trembling. Regardless of how many times he had been cut, but whenever he practiced facing that snow-white sword essence, he was still terrified, incomparably terrified. When he was clear-headed, he didn't dare to even think about it. He was afraid that any memory would make his fragile psychological barrier instantly collapse. His trembling bones and flesh was like a blade of grass that was going to break any second in the storm. Maybe the next second, he would fall down. But his eyes still firmly stared at the front. The direction that the snowy white sword essence would appear from. But Xin Yen Shishu's sword essence, was it something he could see clearly? The difference between the two was like the sky and earth. Xin Yen Shishu was a tried and tested Jindan, a sword xiu that even Tian Song Zi admired. And Suemo was only an outer sect disciple with a cultivation of Lianqi 8th level. The total amount of time that Xin Yen Shishu had spent in the flying sword was over 200 years, and Suemo hadn't even learned the most basic sword arts. On the surface, all of this looked futile. However, he still trembled as he stared fixedly at the front, his mouth unconsciously cursing, damned Renyao, damned Renyao. Snow white, blindingly bright, flying down from the sky like the Milky Way. Suemo tried his best to widen his eyes. At this moment, his body stopped trembling, the mutters from his mouth gone. The entire world was a patch of snow white. He needed to strenuously search in this sea of snow white, search for the quintessence of this sword essence. The time that was given to him was extremely short, not even the blink of an eye. He was like a crazy gambler, betting on that chance that wasn't even 1 in 10,000. However, he didn't have a choice. He didn't have another road. His pupils suddenly dilated and it didn't have the time to recover. Whoosh, the snowy white sword essence sliced Zuomo in two. After an unknown period of time, it was still the sharp pain that woke Zuomo up. Opening his eyes, Zuomo wanted to roar with laughter, but when it came up, it became groans and wails. Ah! So painful! Ah! Fighting to climb up, he resisted the great pain and started, embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. Strands of coolness entered his body. The pain instantly lessened greatly. When he opened his eyes again, they were full of ecstasy. Chapter 28 The Doorway. Zuomo finally found the doorway. This sword essence appeared to look like snow, but he managed to faintly see countless smaller sword essences. These tiny icicle-like sword essences were enormous in number, and were densely packed together, moving in layers. Each tiny sword essence was like a drop of water. And countless drops of water created the ocean, the movements the tide. Xin Yen Shishu's sword essence was like a little tide, a little icicle tide. For the first time, he forgot the pain from his injured mind. The scene he had just seen was extremely short, but what he had seen was enough for him to think for a long time. Dazzling tiny sword essences like ice crystals, moving like the tide. In the vastness and danger was a certain kind of beauty. Even if it was someone like him that didn't understand the sword, he couldn't help but sigh in amazement. He suddenly realized that the snow dragon that Xin Yen Shishu had released wasn't a real one. It was also constructed out of countless snow-white thin sword essences. Dazedly standing in the yard, mind enthralled until deep into the night. Early morning on the second day, Zuomo ran over to Cold Mist Valley. Changing from temporary worker to official worker, and adding on a Zhuji Dan, for the money-grubbing zombie, it hit the key points and he put more care in. He was clear on the goal that he wanted to find answers, but he deeply understood the matter had to be done step by step, especially when it came to the kind of outer sect disciples like him that had nothing. Compared to before, his workload was much greater now. Fourth Shirgu had given him a jade stick. Inside were all the points that needed to be attended to for all kinds of ling herbs. About 90% of it were things that he had never known before. For him, it was a completely new challenge. But luckily he could slowly explore. The ling herbs in the medicine fields looked to be in great condition at the moment. In the corner of the medicine fields, the fire dragon grass had already sprouted. The seed from the fire dragon grass that Wei Xing Shixiang had given him had been planted. Today, he needed to accompany the female disciples to Dongfu. It was called accompaniment, but truthfully, it was more like protection. Sitting on the flying paper crane, Zuomo followed about 30 meters behind the female disciples. This group of women were really chatty. The sounds of their chatter could be heard from far away. Hearing it, Zuomo felt irritated. After being fixed and improved, the flying crane was much steadier and comfortable. He thought silently that the 3 pieces of jingsher that he paid was really worth it. Sitting on the paper crane with nothing to do, he started to once again examine Xin Yen Shishu's sword essence. Even though he wanted to die each time, but he knew very well how valuable this experience was. A chance to learn from Xin Yen Shishu, other than Wei Xing Shixiang, for an outer sect disciple like him, he didn't even need to think about it. He didn't know why Puyao would keep Shishu's sword essence, but for Zuomo, this sword essence was undoubtedly a treasure trove. It wasn't likely for him to learn all of it. But just learning a little was enough for him to reap endless benefits. Just at this time, a clamor came from the front, startling Zuomo from his musings. His heart instantly wasn't happy. Several unfamiliar male shouja seemed to be in a tangle with his sect's female disciples. Zuomo sighed. These days, it wasn't easy to accept gifts. Taking down the paper crane, he slowly walked forward. This was the main path to Dongfu. Zuomo wasn't afraid that the other would really do something too outrageous, so he was extremely confident. Heard that your Liang Feng Shiji went into Zhuji. Good news, good news. The male Xiuzhe in the front said in a smooth tone. The other male Xiuzhe in the surroundings laughed. At this time, a male Xiuzhe fawningly said, Xixiang, I wasn't wrong, the level of these women, they are much tender than the shrews in our sect. True, true. The leader smiled nefariously, warning, but be careful, if they head what you said, you'll have a good time. Haha, of course. Suemo lightly coughed. The female disciples instantly created a path. Since he had accepted the things, he couldn't really just stand by. What is this? Eerie one. Blocking the road for looks. Suemo walked out of the crowd, stealing a look at the other, smiling coldly. This group of people looked like the dregs at a glance, each of them with the head of a deer and the eyes of a mouse. Especially the leader. Looking at that face, Suemo had the impulse to raise his fists and beat him into a bun. Compared to the others in the sect, Suemo's experience on the outside was much richer, his eyes could be said to be shrewd. This group looked just like the kind that wasn't mainstream. To deal with this kind of people, the more polite, the more they felt that you were soft and easy to bully. In reality, the biggest weapon that Suemo relied on was the golden sword ring on his hand. There were 3 sword energies stored inside. To use it to scare people was pretty good. So it was a change of owners. The leader smirked, examining Suemo, the disdain on his face evident, just Lianqi 8th level and dare to try to be the hero. Really doesn't know your own abilities. Even if Liang Feng is here, she wouldn't dare talk like this. Did this person really have a strong background? Suemo's heart was uncertain, but he didn't show it on his face, such boasting. With such abilities, why don't you go to our sect's gate to shout? Running here to bully girls, TSK, really strong, really strong. The female disciples in the surroundings covered their mouths and laughed. The person's face became ugly. He snorted, heard that Wukong sword sect had a genius. Is it such trash like you? Xixiang today will let you know what is manners. His voice landed and a flying sword suddenly appeared in front of him. Suemo instantly was stupefied. The other actually had a flying sword. The first word in his mind was Zhuji. He hadn't thought that this mouse-like person was actually Zhuji. Those with only Lianqi cultivation could not imprint on flying swords. Even Wei Xing Xixiang, before he entered Zhuji, he had never had a flying sword. Incredibly nervous as he stared at the flying sword floating in front of the other, Suemo swallowed tightly. This was the first time he saw a flying sword. Entirely green, about 3 feet, body narrow, edge sharp, the light gleaming. If the blow landed, a bloody hole would certainly be a result. The expressions of the female disciples also changed dramatically. They hadn't thought that they would encounter a Zhuji Xiuzhe this time. They had originally been full of confidence for Suemo, but it instantly evaporated. There was a large chasm between Lianqi and Zhuji. To have a Lianqi face a Zhuji, there wasn't any room at all for resistance. The power of the flying sword wasn't something that a sword energy could contend against. Xiaoguo's apple-like face was pale in fright, terrified as she looked at the flying sword. The person laughed darkly, let's get you to have a good taste of Ye's green point sword. At the same time, his fingers fused together as they swept through the air. It was as though the flying sword was intelligent as it suddenly sliced towards Suemo. The instant the other's flying sword moved, Suemo calmed down. All the nervousness seemed to have disappeared. He stared straight at the flying sword just like how, in these past days, he waited for that snow-white sword essence. The flying sword moved, and his heart instantly became serene. The green flying sword might have looked scared, but this guy's power was limited and the feeling of danger that it gave him was far below that pure sword essence from Xian Yan Shishu. Only a beautiful surface. The sword essence was flimsy and insubstantial. It actually wasn't condensed into form, simply just unbearable to look at. The Ling energy in his body revolving quickly, he calmly looked at the flying sword speeding closer. In a flash, his fused fingers lifted up and pointed into space. A gold sword energy ripped out of his hands. Ping! A crisp sound, the sword energy accurately hitting a spot 3 centimeters behind the sword point. The flying sword shook slightly. Humph! The other snorted. The Ling energy revolved and the flying sword turned in midair, creating a half circle of light in the air, extremely beautiful. Ping! A sound of metal crashing suddenly sounded. The flying sword suddenly stopped, the half circle of light dissolving. It was like a dancing goddess right at the climax when she suddenly sneezed. All the beauty and elegance instantly disappeared. The other was shocked and angry. He could see the person in front of him was relying on a talisman. However, being interrupted 2 times by the other, and the other was still unharmed, he felt it a blight on his reputation. Facing a Lianqi disciple, and 2 of his moves were ineffective. If this passed into the sect, his Shixiang would laugh. The previous 2 moves had only been with the intentions of teaching a lesson, but now, he didn't care that much and furiously revolved his Ling energy. The worst that could happen was being punished after getting back. Gathering the Ling energy, the power of the flying sword was drastically different. The flying sword flew on top of Zhuomo's head, a skin of faint sword energy appearing on the sword, emitting a whining sound like an excited animal preparing to leap at its prey. Zhuomo raised his head. Shining in his narrowed eyes was a hint of excitement and craziness. Hitting the target 2 times in a row greatly increased his confidence. He had no experience fighting against anyone else previously. Last time with Li Yingfeng Shiji, it had only been 1 move. And facing Xian Yen Shishu's sword essence in his sea of consciousness, he didn't even have the power to resist. Not just resist, in front of the vast sword essence, he couldn't even manage to raise a finger. But facing the flying sword here, he had successfully blocked the other's 2 attacks. Just this kind of battle success, it was enough for him to be proud. But at this time, he was completely caught up in a kind of strange excitement and zealotry. He suddenly had an insane idea. Break this flying sword. He didn't know why he would suddenly have such a crazy idea, but this idea was extremely intense once it appeared, so intense that he didn't go to even think if it was realistic. The time wasn't enough for him to think. Under the persuasions of this crazy idea, he also gathered up the Ling energy in his body. Narrowing his eyes, he closely followed the green flying sword above his head. Scenes passed in front of his eyes. The pure, concentrated, vast and dangerous sword essence of Xian Yen Shishu, as though it was a tide of icicles, seemed to be even clearer in front of his eyes. It was like a great entity, slowly moving, and that feeling of cold didn't lessen in the least. Every bit of pain when his consciousness was cleaved seemed to become abnormally clear at this time. He didn't know if it was the stimulation from the pain, but his consciousness was extremely clear, as though everything in the surroundings had calmed. The Ling energy in his body swelled and rushed towards the golden sword ring. He raised his right hand, his fingers fused together as they pointed at the air. Chapter 29 Sword Essence. Has Shixiang heard of Wukong Sword Sect? 2 people were on the mountain, each riding on a green bull. The 2 green bulls were entirely dark green, their hair smooth, the horns on their foreheads pure black, their manner leisurely as they slowly traveled. It was extremely steady, the 2 people on their backs as though they were statues, not moving a sliver. With such a ruckus made recently, it would be hard to not have heard. The older man was called Shixiang, a disciple in Qi Sword Sect. The other was his shidi, Liang Luo. Qi Sword Sect was slightly famous in the region of Dongfu. The 2's innate talents were exceptional. Even though they were limited by their age, but they had power and a reputation. Yeah, it's all so unusual and mysterious, I don't really believe it. Liang Luo said as he shook his head. Shixiang glanced at his shidi, laughing inside. Everything about shidi was good except that he was too proud. But he could understand. Shidi was 10 complete years younger than him, yet their cultivations were almost the same. If Shidi was in a big sect, he most likely would have limitless potential. The sword energy that night, I saw as well. It really was an apparition. He mused, to be able to cause an apparition in the world, this person's comprehension of the sword is astounding. Liang Luo was unconvinced. Pity we can't encounter him and then have a good practice bout, wouldn't that be a great thing? I have never heard of this Wukong sword sect before, I wonder what great luck they ran into. Shi Xiang said with a mirthless smile, Wukong sword sect was only low-key these past years. For Jindan masters at the back. In all of Dongfu, it definitely is enough to enter the top ranks. For Jindan masters. Liang Luo was dumbstruck and couldn't believe it. Xixiao, are you sure? Our sect only has 3 Jindan masters. That Wukong sword sect can have 4. Yes. The smile left Shi Xiang, his heart heavy. The division of power in Dongfu's surroundings had been at equilibrium a long time ago. Such a strong sect suddenly appearing, it would definitely affect this kind of equilibrium. Additionally, Wukong sword sect had been biding their time, people couldn't help but think more. In the 4, the most powerful is Elder Xian Yen. If it wasn't Elder Tian Song Ji that exposed his identity, who would have thought the honored, Ice Dragon Sword, was in our Dongfu? There's now one more strong entity in Dongfu. Liang Luo couldn't help ask, this Ice Dragon Sword is well known? Shi Xiang smiled, replying, I had never heard it before, but according to the elders, he has some notoriety. He became known in the Yao hunt, his death kill is very high. In the past, there were countless Yaomua that died under his sword. Liang Luo inhaled sharply. To be able to survive Yao hunt, then he was already not a simple character. And to gain a reputation in Yao hunt, it definitely meant the other was a strong one. He knew this kind of common knowledge. Just at this time, the two suddenly raised their heads, looking forward. Such strong sword essence. Liang Luo's expression changed and urged the green bull under him. The warm and slow green bull became a blur and then he disappeared. Shi Xiang was also slightly shocked. He hurriedly pushed the green bull and vanished. Zuomo felt the right hand that was wearing the golden sword ring was 30,000 caddies heavy. Raising 1 inch would use up all the energy in the body. All the Ling energy inside was like a wild stallion off the ropes, uncontrollably and crazily flooding towards the golden sword ring on his right hand. His consciousness sunk into a strange kind of void and serenity. The dancing flames in his sea of consciousness froze, as though under a body paralysis spell, frozen and quiet. In the sky of his consciousness, that star suddenly released a blinding light as it slowly revolved. Sitting on the gravestone, Pu raised his head. Looking at the shining star above his head, he laughed soundlessly. Zuomo had never felt his mind so clear. Everything seemed to be under his control. He just knew that he needed to quickly send out this sword energy, otherwise the sword energy was very likely that it would explode in his body and he would become a mess of blood and flesh. He also knew that on the other's flying sword, with its uneven sword energy, he could find at least 7 holes. Yes, he couldn't find any other descriptor. Holes, this label, he felt it was just appropriate. It was much a wondrous feeling. He was drowning in enjoyment. Yet in the eyes of Xiao Gua and the others, at this time Xixiao seemed to be a sword exuding coldness. Every gaze that met his eyes felt their hearts shake. The usually warm and peaceful black pupils were entirely gray-white, indifferent and empty, like a borderless tundra. Even Liang Luo and Shi Xiang who just managed to arrive were shocked. Liang Luo couldn't control his exclamation, "Whoa!" Shi Xiang was a much steadier person and saw in more detail. But when he found the other just had a cultivation of Lianqi 8th level, his expression couldn't help change slightly. The flying sword, shrouded in a green light, turned into a stream of light and howled as it shot at Zuomo. Just at this time, Zhuo Mo's slow-moving right hand finally pointed. Hiss! It was like a strange beast baring its teeth. The two noises made by the energies ripping through air were dissonant and entirely different. The temperature in the surroundings plummeted. A white frosted sword energy leapt from Zhuo Mo's fingertips. Ping! Two streams of light, one green, one white, furiously slammed together. There wasn't the imagined explosion. The white sword energy that Zhuo Mo released seemed like a patch of mist, hitting the other's flying sword. The other's flying sword froze, paralyzed in midair. That person's expression changed drastically. Ding! The flying sword landed on the ground, unmoving like a dead fish. The weakness due to all the strength in the body being pulled out caused his consciousness to blank. That strange feeling was like the tide as it quickly retreated. But before that, he managed to make out his ice frost sword energy had accurately hit the flying sword in a spot near the back. That was the most serious hole that Zhuo Mo had found before. He instinctively chose it as his target of attack. It was a pity that he hadn't broken it. Zhuo Mo was regretful, but his mind swirled and he fainted on the ground. The female disciples behind him instantly screamed in fear. That disciple whose expression changed ran over to pick up his flying sword. When he saw the body was full of cracks, he instantly became angry and sad. When he looked at Zhuo Mo on the ground, hatred rose up in his head. He couldn't help roaring at his other fellow disciples, "You group of trash, what are you standing there for? Chop up this damned guy for me." The other disciples murmured but didn't dare to go up. Zhuo Mo's bravery just now had deeply shocked them. And they weren't dumb. From the looks of it, this incident would get big. Jumping out at this time, wasn't it seeking death? The sect elders were too lazy to care about the little incidents that occurred every day, but if they really wounded someone else, and the others' elders went to the mountain, then they wouldn't be well. Seeing his friends not willing, the leader didn't waste words. His face was twisted as he held up the flying sword and walked towards Zhuo Mo. Xiaoguo sobbed as she leapt over Zhuo Mo's body. Her small apple face was full of fear, but she still kept Shixiang behind her. The other female disciples saw the circumstances, exchanged a look and gritted their teeth as they stood up. "What do you want? In this daytime, you dare commit a crime? I'm telling you, I've endured you guys for a long time. Come on, chop me up. If we don't find your elders this time to discuss everything, I'm telling you, I'm not a woman." It might have been they got into the swing of things, but as one added a sentence here and another there, the vigor of the female disciples increased. Watching from far away, Liang Luo also found the clue. He said in shock, "He really just has Lianqi 8th level in cultivation. How can he have such a pure sword essence? There are so many geniuses in this world." Shixiang couldn't resist sighing, "Just Lianqi in having such pure sword essence, his potential is limitless. And it was originally a gold sword energy, but it could transform into such an icy sword energy. Whose sect has such a disciple?" Liang Luo was still staring in disbelief at Zhuo Mo lying on the ground. Even now, he still couldn't believe a Lianqi disciple could have such a pure sword essence. For a sword xiu, the most important and the hardest to practice was sword essence. In the beginning, what they learned was all kinds of sword scriptures. After enduring countless battles and training, they would gradually comprehend sword essence. Sword essence was unable to be described in language. It depended on each individual to comprehend. Sword xiu that comprehended a sword essence were the only kind of real sword cultivators. Even if they didn't have a flying sword, they still were sharp and unstoppable. Sword scripture as a model, Ling energy as the connection, but the true quintessence was sword essence. Both of them had a cultivation of Ningmai, and had only just entered the doorway to sword essence. Suddenly seeing a Lianqi disciple having such pure sword essence, how could they not be shocked? Holding the cracked flying sword, listening to the curses of Wukong sword sect's female disciples, the person's face turned black and then white, harshly yelling, "All of you, get out of my way. Ah! The female disciples that had just been aggressive instantly screamed and scattered in fear. Only Xiaoguo remained as she cried and unwaveringly protected Zuemo. That person held the flying sword, a face full of viciousness as he shouted at Xiaoguo, "Get out of the way." Xiaoguo whined as she protected Zuem, furiously shaking her head. "You bitch!" The other was enraged. Lifting the sword, he made to slice, frightening Xiaoguo to close her eyes. Bang! Without a warning, the person suddenly seemed to have been hit by a large hammer. His entire body flew out 5 yards and didn't move. Committing a crime publicly in broad daylight, which sect are you from? A calm voice suddenly sounded from behind Xiaoguo. 2 Xiuzhe slowly came over, riding on green bulls. The one who spoke was Shixiang. With one move, Shixiang had intimidated everyone. Even the most idiotic person knew that the other's power was several levels higher. Fear came onto everyone's faces but no one spoke. N. Shixiang heavily humped in dissatisfaction, "Didn't you hear me speak?" At this time, a Xiuzhe trembled as he came out. He gave a bow, responding, "We are the disciples from Dongqi Sword Sect." Offending elder, sorry. Dongqi Sword Sect. Shixiang and Liang Luo exchanged a look, and imperceptibly furrowed their brows. Shixiang sneered, "At what time Dongqi Sword Sect was able to freely harass the female disciples of other sects? I should go ask Zhuo Mei Tian, is this how he teaches the disciples?" The name Zhuo Mei Tian instantly caused everyone's expressions to change drastically, turning into terror. "Leave. If you do this again, don't blame me for not being courteous." Shixiang waved his sleeve and ordered for them to leave. The disciples of Dongqi Sword Sect hurriedly took their Shixiang and ran frantically as they left. Turning his face, Shixiang looked at the crowd of female disciples. In a warm voice, he said, "Don't worry, this little brother is only suffering from exhaustion of Ling energy, nothing major." Which sect are you from? Chapter 30 Schemes, Greetings to both elders. We are disciples of Wukong Sword Sect. A sensible female disciple hurried answered. The other's cultivation was astounding, and he had helped them out of trouble. He shouldn't have any enmity. Wukong Sword Sect. Shixiang and Liang Rong's expressions instantly became strange. They hadn't thought that right after discussing someone else's sect, they actually saved the disciples of that sect and it was a whole crowd. The two's gazes uncontrollably landed on Zuomo's body. This little brother is... Shixiang tried to make his expression seem normal. In reality, his expression was still strange. This disciple lying on the ground only had a cultivation of Lianqi 8th level and naturally could not be Wei Sheng. When did Wukong Sword Sect produce another genius? Shixiang was full of surprise. He had personally seen the apparition when Wei Sheng entered Juji. The picture of the sword energy rising to the heavens was deeply ingrained in his mind. Every time he thought of it, he would be in awe. Originally, he had assumed that all geniuses in the world would be so, yet what he saw today shocked him deeply once again. He had never heard of a Lianqi disciple that could comprehend sword essence. That disciple, sword essence, was not whole. With his experience, he naturally could see at first glance that this disciple had just touched the door to sword essence. His sword essence could only be called in the fledgling stage. But this was enough to surprise him. Even more, this Lianqi disciple's sword essence was extremely weak, but it was extremely pure. This quality made him extremely puzzled. When normal Xiuzhe comprehended the sword essence, at the very beginning, it was always extremely heterogeneous. Over time, through the trials of time, the trials of one's temperament, it would slowly turn to become pure. Just touching on the sword essence, and having such pure sword essence, it was something completely unimaginable. Thinking about his hard work these years, his heart didn't feel good. When did sword essence become something that even Lianqi disciples could play with? Wukong Sword Sect. This unknown sect suddenly became mysterious in Shixiang's eyes. A Wei Sheng who caused an apparition in Juji, and now adding on an unknown disciple who could comprehend sword essence in the stage of Lianqi. This is our Shixiang Zuomo. The female disciple said proudly, Shixiang is the strongest in our outer sect disciples. The other female disciples all nodded their heads in agreement. What had just happened totally changed their impressions of Zuomo. Zombie Shixiang might be a bit greedy, but he wasn't soft in the face of danger and had a sense of responsibility. When Zuomo had comprehended the sword essence and released that last blow, that terrifying presence made them feel deeply intimidated. Outer sect disciple. A vein throbbed in Liang Luo's forehead. A genius that could comprehend sword essence in the stage of Lianqi was only an outer sect disciple. He was very suspicious that he heard it wrong. Shixiang's expression froze as well before quickly returning to normal. The smile on his face became even warmer. As expected, it really is heroes come from the youth. Oh, I have a Ling restoring Dan, it's just perfect for this. Come, I'll help him use it. He took out a jade bottle from his bosom and poured out a Dan about the size of a mung bean. He got off the green bowl and coming to Zuomo's side, he shoved the Ling restoring Dan in Zuomo's mouth. Liang Luo stared with wide eyes at Shixiang's enthusiasm. Ling restoring Dan wasn't something cheap. One pill was 20 pieces of second-grade jingsha. Even they only were given a specified portion each month. Shixiang actually gave it to a stranger. He stared dazedly at Shixiang who seemed like a completely different person, feed another Ling herbs and even aided him in absorbing the Ling herbs. Zuomo slowly woke up. When he opened his eyes, he saw a strange face. He was instantly startled and unconsciously sat up. Little brother, don't be scared. We don't have malicious aims. The other said with a smile and flashed to the side. The befuddled Zuomo stood up and suddenly found his body was warm, wisps of Ling energy spreading through his body. The previous exhaustion had all been swept away. Seeing him wake up, the female disciples instantly crowded over, talking over each other as they narrated everything that had happened. It was only now that Zuomo knew he had been saved by the other people. He quickly went in front of Shixiang and Liang Luo to bow and give thanks. Many thanks to both elders for your rescue. This junior can't thank you enough. Little brothers, what doesn't have to be so courteous. I felt you familiar at first sight. Just a minor thing, don't keep it on the mind. Shixiang smiled and responded, we are from Qi Sword Sect. Actually, Qi Sword Sect and Wukong Sword Sect aren't that far away. Everyone is like one family. Liang Luo wanted to roll his eyes hearing that. What was called not that far away? He had never heard that there was a Wukong sword sect in the surroundings. What was with Shixiang today? Why was he so strange? Zuomo said gratefully, if the two elders hadn't lent their aid, Shixiang waved his hands, interrupting Zuomo's words, we'll regard each other as the same generation. I'll call you little brother Zua. Little brother Zua has a limitless future, maybe it is us that are social climbing. Elder is exaggerating. Zuomo couldn't understand the other's meaning. This kind of praises made him puzzled. Junior is only an outer sect disciple, there's nothing to speak of in terms of future. Shixiang brushed away his annoyance, is it that little brother Zua doesn't like us too? Elder, it really is irritating. Zuomo couldn't help but struggle. In the world of Shouja, other than in the same sect, there wasn't any distinction of age between different sections. And there was no age in cultivation, and it was hard to distinguish from the appearance. Usually, most of it was divided by the cultivation. Those stronger were elders, no matter their age. Even though he couldn't detect the other's cultivation, but to be able to easily make that crowd leave, these two people were more than sufficient to be called elders by him. He was very sensible. Like that little thousand crane. If he hadn't been certain that the other wouldn't find him, he wouldn't have written such a reply. Right now, facing the others, he was naturally docile. Just at this time, Shi Xiang smiled and informed, "You can call us de Ge. I am Shi Xiang, he is my shitty Liang Luo." Zhua Mo was incomparably obedient and bowed again, "Shi de Ge, Liang de Ge." The female disciples all looked with admiration at Zhua Mo. To have relations with strong Xiuzhi, there were naturally many benefits. This elder in front of them clearly was admiring of Zhua Mo Xixiang. Xixiang really hit the jackpot. As expected, they heard Shi Xiang continue, "Since you have called me de Ge, as the brother, I naturally have to have a meeting gift. This, ice crystal sword, even if it is 3rd grade, but its attributes lean towards cold and yin. I saw that brother's was sword essence leans towards ice and this flying sword is perfect for you." Under a crowd of drooling gazes, Zhua Mo dazedly received this flying sword. The sword was about 2 feet and 7 or so inches. The body was translucent and sparkling as though it was carved from ice, and emitted cold air. A pie fell down from heaven and hit him unconscious. The appearance of this flying sword wasn't ordinary. Zhua Mo straightforwardly converted it to Jingshi in his mind. So many Jingshi. Shi Xiang kept giving looks at Liang Luo. Liang Luo helplessly reached into his bosom and after fishing for a while, took out a folded seal paper with some pain. He threw it at Zhua Mo, coldly informing, "Spirit traveling seal." Zhua Mo was so happy right now he almost fainted. He wasn't clear about the price of the flying sword but he had some knowledge of the price of the spirit traveling seal. The conditions for a person to use the spirit traveling seal was not high. It was one of the rare paper seals that a lianqi could use. Putting this seal on the legs, travel 1,000 miles without being tired. It was much faster than his flying paper crane. Carefully taking the spirit traveling seal, he took a look, and determined inside that this was a 3rd grade spirit traveling seal. Oh! This too were so generous. However, the suspicions in his heart increased rather than decreased. There was no such thing as uncalled for love in this word. These 2 items, any one of them was worth more than his entire wealth. The other had no reason to carelessly give to someone. This was what really puzzled him. Today, we still have other matters, so farewell. After a few days, we'll go to Wukong Mountain to find you and have a drink. Shi Xiang smiled as he bid farewell to Zhua Mo and, along with Liang Luo, rode the green bulls as they quickly disappeared. Zhua Mo was dumbstruck. Seeing the 2 vanish, after a beat, he suddenly said to the female disciples, "Someone pinch me, is this a dream?" 7 or 8 hands simultaneously reached over. A shriek echoed on the mountain path. "Xixiang, what were you doing?" Liang Luo was slightly discontent. A spirit traveling seal naturally wasn't anything big to him but he wasn't so generous to give it to a stranger. If it wasn't that he was extremely trusting of Xixiang, he wouldn't have even paid attention. Sitting on the green bull, Shi Xiang was pleased. He is an outer sect disciple. What about an outer sect disciple? There are many outer sect disciples in this world. Liang Luo said unconcernedly. Shi Xiang glanced at Liang Luo. He asked in return, "What does Shidi feel about Zhua Mo's talent?" Liang Luo choked. A moment later, he squeezed out a sentence, "Not bad, better than me." Shidi has no need to undervalue yourself. If you train hard, you will naturally win over him. Shi Xiang was afraid that his Shidi's confidence would suffer and comforted. He then said solemnly, "However, such talents, no matter in what sect, he should be one of the more important disciples in the sect. But he actually is only an outer sect disciple." Liang Luo wasn't stupid and instantly reacted, "Does Xixiang want to recruit him into our sect? Why can't I? Such potential, that Wukong Sword sect hasn't recognized it, wouldn't it complete us? An outer sect disciple entering another sect, if Wukong Sword sect came up to our door, they wouldn't have a foot to stand on." Liang Luo knew what Shixiang said was true. The turnover rate and mobility of outer sect disciples were extremely high. Those that entered another sect were countless. If they swindled Zhuo Mo over, Wukong sword sect could not move based on this. Such potential, are his elders blind? Could it be an elder purposefully putting him in the outer sect disciples to toughen? Liang Luo voiced a doubt. Shi Xiang answered, haha, remember how he answered when I praise him for his limitless future. What he said proved that definitely wasn't put in the outer sect by the elders. Thinking about that, I feel there is another possibility. It is probably that he only just comprehended the sword essence and his sect elders hadn't found out yet. Liang Luo's mind jumped, then why didn't we just take him with us right now? If he returns to the mountain and something else happened, wouldn't it be ruined? Don't panic. I saw that he was very cautious of us, and there were too many people. If we try too hard now, it would be unlikely to succeed. It's better to back off first and wait for a few days before we go find him. Move with feelings, entice with benefits, I'm confident it will work. Shi Xiang explained confidently. Liang Luo realized, Shixiang is wise. The two smiled at each other. Eldest brother. Chapter 31 Choi Suemo had come to Dong Fu many times before and would always window shop. However, to accompany women, especially a crowd of women to window shop, this required a very strong endurance of the body, probably only those who cultivated the body could endure. Seeing that they brought everything they needed, Suemo sneaked away. He first went to buy the gold ore. What Pu Yao had said last time, he remembered it. He also brought a jade stick full of basic seal formations. Even though there were teachings from the sect, but there were only just a few kinds. Seal formations were something that all Xiuzhi had to learn. No matter if it was forging or making dan, it all required understanding seal formations. Suemo brought them to create ling fields in the future, even if it was far away. The jade stick didn't cost much, the expensive one was the gold ore. 20 pieces of second-grade jingsher was enough for him to suffer in pain for a long time, but he still decided to buy it. His attitude now was different than before. Before, he only looked at jingsher. Even if he still liked jingsher, but he put more importance on the future. After fourth Shirgu revealed it, he was clear that he couldn't return to the past. Those simple aspirations were completely shattered. He was walking on a road that he didn't know the destination of. What was waiting in the front for him? Breaking into pieces? Finding the answer? He didn't know. What had seemed fresh and exciting in the past was now dull and tasteless now. He found a quiet place to sit down and started to think back to the last sword energy he had released. No one taught him. Even Pu Yao only made him experience it for himself. Towards Pu Yao, he only felt grateful. If there wasn't Pu Yao, he might not even have the chance to seek answers. Now that he had the chance, how could he not treasure it? He hadn't realized his own transformation. He suddenly understood some of what Wei Shixiang felt. Obsession, unrelenting obsession. Every time he thought about his appearance being changed, his mind erase, his wooden face would burn with pain, like it was reminding him there was a pair of hands that wiped away his face, that was a pair of hands that wiped away his memories. This burning that seeped in his bones made him unable to tolerate himself muddle-headedly living. He wanted answers. He was very clear just how low his starting point was. He didn't want to waste even 1 second. He thought of all the ways, worked over his minds, used all his cunning to make himself stronger, to let himself have greater power. He wanted answers. In the corner of the busy street, he serenely coiled his legs and mused. In the roaring sea of fire, Pu sat on the gravestone and lazily listened to the sound tablet. The female disciples finally brought all they needed. Everyone's faces were brimming with content. Suemo finally released a breath. He was now in a rush to return back. Today's encounter let him have a taste of power. He desperately and impatiently wanted to keep training. But in consideration of the safety of these female disciples, he still sat on the flying paper crane and slowly followed them. But he still took grasp of each bit of time. Returning to the little yard, the first thing Mo did was put the black gold worm and the gold ore together, dig a small hole near the Ling vein and bury them. After burial, he entered his consciousness. Facing Pu Yao, he said, "Pu, let's continue." Unexpectedly, Pu lazily said, "Continue." "Continue what?" Mo blanked before quickly recovering his calm. "What conditions do you have?" He, it's so convenient talking with smart people." Pu smiled lightly and straightened. "This is correct, where in the world are there free meals?" He, I want souls." "Souls?" Mo jumped in fear. Pu Yao's expression was relaxed and his voice carefree as he said, "Souls are good things. They taste fresh, full of vitality. Blood, human meat, they can't compare." Just a few words and Mo became quite scared. In his mind, he couldn't help but think of those great monsters, eating raw human meat, pulling tendons, sucking marrow, eating souls. For a Shilja whose dream was becoming a Ling plant farmer, things like souls were enough to make him jump out of his skin. "No way." Mo resolutely refused. Pu Yao was truly a great monster. Even though he wanted power, but he definitely didn't want himself become a servant of power. "Didn't you want to learn the sword?" He, other than the sword, I still have many other things to teach you. I have many talismans. He, as long as you have good souls, I can exchange all of it. Pu's crimson tongue licked his lips, voice full of enticement. "No way." Mo suddenly relaxed. He sat down facing Pu Yao, stating, "I'm not interested in killing people." "Oh." Pu Yao raised a thin eyebrow, his eyes narrowing. "You have to think clearly. Other people's lives, how can they be as valuable as yours?" It actually is very simple to kill another. "Oh, one soul and I will let you have a good comprehension of this sword essence and can teach you many things. I just knew that you didn't have good intentions." Mo glared fixedly at Pu, coldly stating, "Pity you have the wrong plan." Pu Yao continued to chuckle. Mo suddenly felt his body tighten and couldn't move. "I'm wrong." Pu Yao suddenly raised his voice. So many years, no one has ever dared to say I'm wrong in front of me." He slowly walked in front of the unmovable Mo, his icy hands touching Mo's neck. "Afraid?" Great. I really tried many kinds and found that terror is the best flavor in all of the souls. Did you know? Souls that died with great terror, it's like a beautiful wine that fermented perfectly. Just eating it once, ooh, it is unforgettable." A cold finger swiped across the blood vessel on Mo's neck. Pu Yao's expression was mirthful, the crimson-red eyes flashed with craziness. Mo's body shook. He kept telling himself not to be afraid, but terror was like a spring that couldn't be plugged, furiously sprouting out. No matter how he tried, his body wouldn't move. Struggle is useless. Pu Yao was still smiling, his eyes cold. "Your stupidity really makes me disappointed. Didn't you know, pets need to realize that they are pets?" He hated this feeling. Being manipulated, being controlled, his body not in control. Something in Mo's heart seemed to have lit up. Terror was swiftly taken over by anger. His blood seemed to have been burning. He couldn't help swearing, "Go to hell. Such a stubborn little thing." Pu Yao shook his head and smiled, his right hand gently squeezing. "Ah!" Mo gave a wail. His entire person seemed to be bound by an invisible hand into a strange shape. The pain in his body was like countless thin needles piercing his body. His awareness started to dull. Just at that moment, a warm stream suddenly rose up from Mo's chest. "Want to interfere?" Pu Yao seemed to have found a naughty thing and his mouth had a light smile. His entire body suddenly disappeared from his spot and appeared next to Zhuo, his right hands easily thrusting into Zhuo's chest. Easily taking his hand out of Zhuo's chest, a 5-colored bead appeared between his fingers. This bead was the size of a mung bean. It looked like a rainbow glass, light swirling inside. Leisurely examining the small bead for a while, Pu muttered to himself, so it was this thing. Finishing, he prepared to crush the bead. Just at this moment, his hand suddenly stopped moving. Wisps of black smoke spread from the gravestone, slow and solid. In the blink of an eye, the sky above the sea of flames was covered by black clouds. The dancing flames seemed to be quite afraid of these misty black clouds. They shrunk down, a rarely seen sight. The star that was in the sky was also robbed of light by the black clouds. Pu dazedly stood, motionless. An extremely complicated emotion floated in his bloody eye, seemingly sorrowful, seemingly happy, seemingly fond, seemingly furious. After a long time, he said lightly, "You really want to choose such a piece of rubbish?" The black clouds moved, the layers roiling. The roaring sea of fire seemed to be suppressed, almost extinguishing, while that star in the sky had almost completely disappeared. Pu Yao stood like a tree, seeming to not have registered it. The black clouds became even thicker. The entire sea of consciousness was now a patch of black, nothing could be seen. He suddenly sneered, the light flashing in his bloody right eye, "You do know that to want to persuade me, it isn't that simple." The surroundings became quiet. The black clouds didn't give a response and the two sides were deadlocked. After an unknown length of time, the light in Pu Yao's bloody right eyes gradually dimmed. He suddenly laughed lightly, and with the burdens of the ages, he shrugged helplessly, "It's always like this, so boring." His finger flicked and the glass bead in his hands entered Zhuo's body. The black clouds instantly clear without a trace to be found. The sea of fire that lost its suppressor started to once again burn fiercely. That star in the sky gave off light. Pu Yao stared at the gravestone for a long time without speaking. Zhuo slowly woke up. When he opened his eyes, he hurriedly inspected his body. Seeing it uninjured, he finally gave a breath of relief. What had happened? Why did Pu Yao let go of him? Just when he was puzzled, Pu Yao suddenly appeared. "You really took a long time to wake up." Pu Yao's expression was full of mockery, such a fragile spirit. "Originally, I had wanted to play. I hadn't bargained for a few thousand years. It ruined my fun. But it is normal. A person that doesn't have his features or mind, his heart naturally is also soft. I'm so pitiful." Zhuo was silent. His fists uncontrollably tightened. "Speaking about it, there is a place that has souls and you don't have to kill anyone. But it is very dangerous. How about it? Are you interested?" Pu Yao's expression was leisurely. "What place?" Zhuo asked in spite of himself. Just now, Pu Yao's words pierced his heart. You don't need to know now. Don't worry, you don't need to kill anyone. You just have to say whether you agree or not. As to payment, when your conditions are enough, I naturally will let you be satisfied." "I agree." He didn't think about it further. Zhuo nodded. As long as he didn't have to kill anyone, he wasn't afraid of danger. He didn't have anything else to lose. AI finally finished this transaction. For a few souls, this really wasn't easy. Business, not doing it for a long time, I really deteriorated. Pu Yao ruefully said in an experienced tone. Zhuo didn't know what to say. Pu Yao turned his face over. "All right, let's discuss another transaction." "Another transaction?" Zhuo was full of wariness and some puzzlement. "Jingshi, I require Jingshi." Pu Yao chucked, "Want to experience sword essence? 10 pieces of second-grade Jingshi each time. How about it, isn't it cheap?" Zhuo stared with a gaping mouth. Chapter 32 Refusal. The little dark gold sword cheerfully flew around Zhuo fingers. It was extremely fast, leaving behind a dash of gold light like a gold-colored lightning bolt. Zhuo's eyes showed happiness. Art of Aged Gold finally reached the 3rd level. After the 3rd level, the aged gold energy also transformed. The once dark gold sands became even finer and shinier, the gold sword that was formed even more exquisite. It was like a narrow fish, nimbly darting and swerving. The little gold sword was very small. The region it moved in was only his palm, and the sword moves were all very simple. There was none of the grand moves. However, if an experienced sword shio was here, they could be shocked to find that contained in the movements of this little gold sword was a faint strand of sword essence. Zhuo could also feel this small strand of sword essence. Other than joy, he couldn't help but feel pain. Returning home, no matter how hard he tried to remember, he still couldn't find the feeling of that last sword strike that day. With no other solution, he could only spend Jingshi at Pu Yao's to experience sword essence. 10 pieces of 2nd grade Jingshi each time. He spent all the Jingshi he had and finally comprehended a sliver of sword essence. It was this sliver of sword essence that caused his Art of Aged Gold to break through to the 3rd level. Compared to before, the present Pu Yao was a completely unscrupulous businessman that only recognized Jingshi and nothing else. He didn't know what really happened the last time. Why did Pu Yao release him in the end? It was clear that Pu Yao's attitude towards him had changed slightly. He seemed even more impatient, even hard to communicate with. If there was no matter about him and he was called, he would ignore. But for some reason, Zhuo felt the present Pu Yao was much safer, even though he needed to spend large amounts of Jingshi. Art of Aged Gold, reaching the 3rd level meant that he only needed one more spell to reach the 3rd level before he could become a ling plant farmer. If he became a ling plant farmer, his status in the sect would be drastically different. The sect would supply him with large amount of resources, and then he could even more quickly increase his strength. The question he was facing now was what spell to choose to make a breakthrough. In the end, he chose Art of Flora. In the low-level spells, Art of Flora was renowned for its complicated finger motions. This was also the reason that Zhuo chose it. Finger motions, its trace could be found in almost all low-level spells. Low-level shouja didn't have enough cultivation and frequently needed the assistance of the finger motions to completely cast. Even though after the stage of Jingdan, finger motions would almost completely disappear, but before that, finger motions was a very useful technique. Just as Zhuo was concentrating on practicing his finger motions, Pu Yao, sitting on the gravestone in the sea of consciousness, snorted and said to himself, "You just chose this piece of rubbish?" After practicing for a long time, Zhuo found that he was stuck at the same level. If he wanted to improve more, it was very difficult. His finger motions were actually very proficient, but it was always lacking flow. Thinking about the special feeling when he used Art of Flora to help Liang Feng Shiji and the others weed, he guessed that was the direction he should work at. But the profound feeling, similar to when he had released the sword at the enemy last time, no matter how he thought, he couldn't find it. Asking Pu Yao. It was a pity that Zhuo didn't have any more Jingshi. For the next following days, he still didn't have any ideas. The stubbornness in Zhuo's bones was aroused. Wasn't it just finger motions? He thought of a way. He took out a basin of water. Submerging both hands in the water, he started to practice his finger motions underwater. The feeling under in the water was expectedly different. The resistance was much greater. The finger motions, originally well practiced, instantly became scattered. Zhuo instantly became alert. He felt he found the direction. What he was most afraid of was not having a direction. If he could find the direction, he could overcome even the biggest problem. Just at this time, Shi Xiang and Liang Luo came to visit as they promised. The two's visit was very unexpected to Zhuo. He had originally thought the two were insincere and just said it, and never though they would actually really come. Tu Ning my Xiuzhe coming to visit a Lianqi outer sect disciple. No one would believe it. Huh, little brothers Hua, it's only been a few days, and you've improved greatly. I think that very soon you would enter Zhuji. Shixiang smiled and then with a face full of concern, said, have you prepared what you need for Zhuji? I have a few Zhuji Dan here, the grade isn't bad. Sui Mo was even more cautious. Unreasonable attention, if it wasn't malicious, it was robbery. The other was way too enthusiastic and he automatically was on the defense. His mouth hurried replied, Shi de Ge is too kind. Just a while ago, 4th Shigu bestowed a Zhuji Dan, it's enough for me. Liang Luo and Shixiang quietly exchanged a look but this didn't escape Sui Mo's watch. Shixiang smiled, responding, that's good, that's good. Inside, he thought that it was not going well. Had Sui Mo's elders started to pay attention to his potential? Such a genius such as little brother Sui would always attract attention no matter the place. Haha. When are you becoming an inner sect disciple, we can come and celebrate. He didn't give up and probed. Sui Mo shook his head, our sect needs Zhuji before it is enough to become an inner sect disciple. It's still too early. Hope rose in Shixiang. His face was greatly shocked, oh, but such a great talent as little brothers will also have to be limited by such old-fashioned rules. He didn't know what the other wanted. Sui Mo said cautiously, Shi de Ge is joking, where do I count as a genius? At one side, Liang Luo was already impatient. He always liked being straightforward and crisply opened, little brother Sui, why don't you come to our Qi sword sect? If you are willing to come, you would definitely be a core disciple. Shixiang looked nervously at Sui Mo blanked. After a long beat, he finally reacted and smiled hesitantly, both de Ge, don't joke. This brother knows how much I'm worth. Shixiang said seriously, we aren't joking and are inviting you sincerely. Little brother's was talents are exceptional, but the hardship in the long journey of cultivation, I'm sure that little brother's is very clear. With your talents, you should try to enter Zhuji as fast as possible and leave behind the common duties, concentrate on cultivating and be assisted by guidance from elders. I cannot promise that you could reach the top but becoming Jin Dan, the possibility is very great. Sui Mo stared dazedly at the two people. If you are always entangled in these common duties, no matter how good your talents are, they would be wasted. Shixiang said earnestly. They were sincere. Sui Mo believed in the two people's words but suddenly he also felt this was preposterous. At what time did he become exceptionally talented and was invited by others to enter a sect? Talent? He didn't have that kind of thing. Otherwise, would the sect leader not have seen it? The sect leader had been the one that brought him back. In the past he would sometimes think that maybe it was that the sect leader didn't have good enough insight but the presence that night the sect leader and the Shirshu had exuded made him understand that the Shirshu that usually didn't appear were all powerful and extraordinary people. The two people were only interested in him because of Pu Yao. If other people had the same opportunities as him, they would definitely be much stronger than him. He thought about 2 years ago, the instant that he opened his eyes. Thought about him sweating up a storm in the Ling fields. Shixiang and Liang Luo didn't speak. They were quietly waiting for Sui Mo's choice. Even though they didn't understand what he had to hesitate about. They had given sufficient sincerity. This kind of benefits, giving them to a Lianqi disciple, it had never happened at Qi Sword Sect. After a long time, when the lowered head of Sui Mo rose and the muddled eyes recovered clarity, the two knew that Sui Mo had made a choice. Sui Mo said earnestly, many thanks to both de Ge for your goodwill. This brother appreciates it. These years, I'm used to living in Wukong Sword Sect. The sect and the elders have been very attentive to me and I have no intentions of leaving. The tone wasn't heavy but it was full of a kind of determination. In his sea of consciousness, Pu Yao disdainfully spat out a word, idiot. Disappointed expressions came upon Shixiang and Liang Luo's faces. But they also knew that it wouldn't be effective to speak more. They didn't have the interest in chatting, and after exchanging a few more words, they bid farewell. Sending away the two, Zhuo Mo returned to his little yard and stared into space. Then he continued to bury his head in practicing art of flora. The time passed by extremely full. Pu Yao didn't pay attention to Zhuo Mo. Zhuo Mo was happy to not be disturbed. If the devil didn't torment him, he thanked the earth and the heavens. Every day, he would travel to Cold Mist Valley, learn to care for all kinds of ling herbs. After Art of Aged Gold reached the 3rd level, the power increased greatly. He inspected all the ling herbs in Cold Mist Valley one by one and found some deeply hidden pests. After spending effort to exterminate those pests, his Art of Aged Gold became even more proficient. He still couldn't imprint on the flying sword, so he decided to use the little aged gold sword to practice sword scriptures and ruminate on sword essence. In the water, he practiced art of flora, and reinforced his finger movements. All the other time, he devoted it all to embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. The main use of embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation was to increase consciousness, but Zhuo Mo found that it could also increase ling energy. The effects were much better than his mainstream crappy 10 principles scripture. He basically abandoned 10 principles scripture and changed to cultivate embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. Every day, he only rested for 4 hours. All the other time was put on cultivation, continuous cultivation. During this period of time, he wanted his art of flora to reach the 3rd level. After this little while, the new cycle of planting ling grains would arrive. He would be occupied. In that case, there would be much less time left for cultivation. In the basin of water, a pair of withered hands, from fingertip to wrist, were all immersed in water. The parts above the wrist were bare in the air. Zhuo Mo's eyes were closed, exhaling and concentrating. Suddenly, the 10 thin fingers moved, fast as light, creating layers of undercurrents, the movements adding a kind of cold flavor. The speed at which the fingers moved was extremely fast. The surface of the water was like boiling water, countless undercurrents restlessly moving, but what was strange was that not even a drop splashed. The 2 wrists seemed to be made of copper, not moving a sliver. The nimbleness of the 10 fingers were astounding, the dazzling finger movements changing. The closed eyes didn't open. Zhuo Mo's breathing unconsciously became heavier. The movements of his hands became even faster. The fingers under the water were unable to be distinguished. Splashes bloomed like flowers, the speed became faster, the collision between splashes suddenly became vicious. The water in the basin seemed to have been lifted by an invisible hand. The surface of the water completely raised up 2 centimeters. As the speed of the 10 fingers became faster, the surface became even higher. That pair of withered hands seemed to have a strange attraction, sucking the ball of water and holding it in midair. Suddenly, Zhuo Mo opened his eyes. The 10 fingers in the water suddenly became straight. Bang! The ball of water sucked onto the hands broke like a vase, turning into 10 bursts of water arrows, slashing out. Joy made its way onto Zhuo Mo's eyes. Chapter 33 The Spring Sprout Jade Metal Dong Fu. As one of the 13 primary towns of Tianyujie, all kinds of authorities were very developed. Even though Tianyujie was governed by Kunlun Jing, and it was primarily made up of sword sects, but the requirements of sword shio to need all kinds of resources wasn't small. So while the core disciples of all the sects cultivated the sword, they would still try very hard to attract other kinds of shouja. Different shouja received different treatment. The same types of shouja would also receive different treatment based on their cultivation. Due to this, the evaluations of all kinds of professions were extremely important. It would be a very difficult thing to get a sword shio to determine the skill level of a ling plant farmer. For each shouja, after being professionally licensed, they could quickly find a satisfactory job in every location. All kinds of cultivators had their own authorities. The Ling plant farmers had the Institute of Ling Plants, the beast speakers had the Institute of Beast Language. Congratulations, it's very rare to see such a young Ling plants farmer in Dongfu. And you have comprehended the 4th level of Little Art of Cloud and Rain, your future is limitless. The Ling plant farmer responsible for the exam smiled as he gave Suemo a jade medal. Barely visible inside the medal was a small and tender sprout, 5 elements energy revolving around it. The jade medals of a Ling plant farmer were sorted into 4 levels. Spring sprout, summer flower, autumn fruit and winter hibernation. There were even finer distinctions at each level, but those exams were extremely complicated. Many Ling plant farmers only ever did the licensing for the 4 levels. Suemo joyfully took the jade medal. To get this jade medal, he really hadn't wasted all his effort. The Ling plants farmer in Dongfu only had the authority to give out spring sprout jade medals. To get a higher level jade medal, he needed to go to a more prosperous place. However, in the short term, Suemo completely didn't have to consider that problem. The leveling up of Ling plants farmers was extremely hard. The summer flower jade medal required all 5 kinds of spells to reach the 5th level. Other than that, they needed to know how to create Ling fields above the 4th grade. After giving thanks to the elder, Suemo decided to leave the institute. Just as he came out of the Institute of Ling Plants, numerous people instantly circled around. Mr. Zhua, our sect desperately needs a Ling plant farmer, is Mr. Zhua willing? Don't listen to him, he's only a small sect, can't give good benefits. Our sect is much more prosperous, you can ask for all the benefits if you are willing to come to our sect. The explosions of sound caused Suemo's head to turn to a mess. Just at this time, a deep voice suddenly interrupted, sorry, excuse me. Everyone, don't block my Shiji, 1. Sorry, please make way. The voice wasn't loud but everyone heard it clearly. A hidden presence spread and the crowd naturally made way. Just this cultivation was enough to make everyone stop talking. Seeing the smiling fat person not far away, Suemo's heart jumped and he hurriedly went up to bow, 3rd Shishu. And then bowed to Li Yingfeng behind Yan Lu, Shiji. The smile on Yan Li's face was harmonious and affable. He patted Suemo's shoulder, not bad, not bad. Didn't think a Ling plant farmer could come out of our sect. The sect leader will be ecstatic. If it wasn't that I had something to do in Dongfu, I'm afraid I wouldn't even know. At this time, Li Yingfeng added, when Shidi went weeding a short while ago, I knew that our sect would soon have a Ling plant farmer. But I didn't think Shidi would be this fast. Shidi, congratulations. Just a fluke. Facing Yan Lu Shishu, Suemo was extremely nervous. A great monster was still living in his head. If Shishu found out. He barely kept his composure, his mouth going, my luck was good recently. Originally, even I thought it would take longer. This clearly says that our sect is soon to rise. The smile on Yan Li's face became energetic, let's go, today is a happy occasion. Pick whatever you like, it would be Shishu's gift to you. Li Yingfeng smiled from the side, adding, yeah, Shidi made this such an unexpected attack, as a Shiji, I didn't even have time to prepare a present. No, Shiji is too polite. Suemo furiously waved his hand. Standing beside 3rd Shishu, he was extremely nervous and didn't dare to even breathe heavily. But 3rd Shishu started to talk and pull him at the same time. Of the wealthiest in the sect, 3rd Shishu would be the wealthiest. 3rd Shishu had managed all the assets of the sect for many years and accumulated much wealth. Based on what could be seen now, Yan Lu Shishu seemed to want to nurture Li Yingfeng Shiji into his successor. Suemo felt this was pretty good. Li Yingfeng Shiji was straightforward and honest, knew how to conduct herself and had a pretty good relationship with him. The store that third Shirshu took him to was naturally much higher class than what he normally shopped at. All kinds of talismans dazzled his eyes, a veritable feast. What he picked most of was jade sticks. For him, the jade sticks that recorded all kinds of scriptures and spells were what he needed the most. Yen Lo also noticed it, and his attitude towards Swa Mo became even more amiable. The fact that Swa Mo would get the spring sprout jade medal before he entered Juji was proof of his exceptional talents. After getting the jade medal, he wasn't greedy and lived it up. What he picked the most were still jade sticks. That meant that he had strong motivations to keep going. A young disciple that had both of those points, even if they didn't have good opportunities, they would definitely reach a pretty good height. There wasn't an elder that didn't like this kind of disciples, especially Yen Lo, who was used to the mediocrity of the disciples in the sect. He knew that there hadn't been any attention paid to this disciple in the past. If he didn't rope him in now, then he would be too stupid. Today, he had coincidentally been at Dong Fu to take care of matters. Hearing that someone had received a jade medal, he had come over to see if he could attract them and hadn't thought it would be a disciple of his sect. He couldn't help picking out a pile of talismans that Swa Mo could have a use for. At the side, Li Yingfeng also recognized that even though her zombie shitty hadn't entered Juji, but in reality, he had already become one of the core disciples. Maybe in the Wukong sword sect of the future, Wei Xing Shixiang would be in charge of fighting, Swa Mo shitty of internal matters, and she would take over her master's role and be responsible for external matters. Especially since no one could replace her and Swa Mo in their roles. Looking at it now, Luo Li Shixiang was unable to threaten Wei Xing Shixiang's position. Also, Wei Xing Shixiang's relationship with Swa Mo shitty was extremely good. For the elders, they were naturally happy to see everyone cooperating. Li Yingfeng, who sorted out her thoughts, was also generous and gave 2 talismans to Swa Mo. Swa Mo's mind was completely blown. Holding a pile of talismans and jade sticks, his awareness was dizzy. Any item that he was holding now, in the past, was something he dreamed about. Now he was holding a pile in his hands. The affable smile on Shirshu's face made him think of a previous life. In the past 2 years, after the first time he met the sect leader when he woke up, he had never spoken to another Shirshu after that. And all of this, it was only because he received a jade medal. The gray-beaked goose flew steadily, its back broad and soft. It was very comfortable sitting on the top, nothing that Swa Mo's impotent flying paper crane could compare to. Little Mo doesn't have a steed yet. Yen Lo said and turned to order Li Yingfeng, I remember there are still a few more gray-beaked geese, send one to Little Mo. Tell the people below to send over ling grass as necessary. Yes. Li Yingfeng noted it down. Swa Mo thought to himself, their sect does have some wealth. When the 3 reached the gates of the mountain, the outer sect disciples had already lined up at the gates to welcome them. It was evident that the sect leader had already known of the news that he had received a jade medal. Their gazes as they looked at him were extremely complicated. Jealousy, admiration, dissatisfaction. Just a day ago, everyone was the same outer sect disciples. Today, they needed to come out to welcome him. Not many people had been surprised that Wei Xing Shixiang would become an inner sect disciple, since he had been the first among the outer sect disciples and established a powerful image in their hearts. But among them, Swa Mo hadn't been exceptional. Other than his little art of cloud and rain, and that face that never had an expression, there were very few places which he had that people would remember. Some of the people had caution and fear in their eyes as they looked at Swa Mo. They had once bullied Swa Mo and was afraid he was going to get back at them now. Even the most stupid knew that it was certain that Swa Mo was going to become an inner sect disciple. Seeing the looks of these people, Swa Mo's heart wasn't comfortable either, but felt slightly relieved. He had finally left this group. That meant that he had made progress. For him, any kind of progress right now was incredibly valuable, and he didn't care about the looks of the other outer sect disciples. The gray-beaked goose didn't slow down but followed the mountain path past the outer sect disciples, respectfully standing as it climbed. Wukong Hall was the discussion place of Wukong Sword Sect. Many of the main matters of the sect were held here. When Zuo and the others arrived, the sect leader and the other Shirshu were already waiting in Wukong Hall, faint expressions of joy on their faces. The fact that someone from the sect could qualify for a spring sprout jade medal was definitely an unexpected delight. And such a young disciple, his future would be limitless. First there was Wei Sheng who had such outstanding talent, and now there was a disciple in Lianqi that could receive a medal. They were completely bowled over by joy. Facing so many of the Shirshu for the first time, Zuo couldn't help but be nervous. Xin Yen Shirshu's pair of cold eyes made him feel there was a blade behind his back, his entire body frozen. Please, Pu Yao, don't make a fuss now. Just as he was nervous, the sect leader Pei Yuan ran opened. At the beginning when I picked you up, I didn't have too many expectations for you, and didn't give much care. To be able to achieve all this, it is all your own efforts and extremely rare. To not give up in such a hopeless situation, swimming against the current, very good. In our sect, whatever strength you have determines the level of treatment. You showed your potential and so the sect will treat you better, do not have hate. Pei Yuan Ran was very straightforward. The bits of hate in Zuomo's heart had dissipated much upon hearing the sect leader's words. This disciple doesn't dare, he said with his head lowered. Pei Yuan Ran nodded his head and his voice became warmer. Now that you have a jade medal, you are the only Ling plant farmer in our sect. The treatment in the past is naturally not appropriate for you. I heard your fourth Shirgu say that you are responsible for the medicine fields of Cold Mist Valley now. This will depend now on whether you have the interest. From this day onwards, you are formally one of the inner sect disciples of our sect. You will receive the same allowance of Jingshi as your other Shixiang. Other than that, our sect's West Wind Valley has a patch of empty third-grade Ling fields, that will be given to you. The Ling energy is thick in the valley, you could move to live inside the valley and try to enter Zhuji earlier. If you need anything, you can ask your third Shirshu. As to the Ling fields inside the valley, you can plant whatever you want. We will not interfere. You can also use the other empty Ling fields in the sect, but at the end you need to give 3/10 to the sect. Zuomo's eyes widened, his gaze stupefied. He felt that he was going to faint. The sect leader was giving an entire mountain valley to him. Refers to disciple of a younger generation. Means nephew. Chapter 34 Inner Sect Disciple Pei Yuan Ran looked at Zuo who was stupefied and a mirth-filled smirk flashed at the corner of his lips. All inner sect disciples must have a master. Since you received the Spring Sprout Jade Medal, you should go under your fourth Shirgu's line. Your fourth Shirgu is skilled at making Dan. No one else in the sect can compare to her knowledge of Ling herbs. Even in Dongfu, she is famous for this knowledge. What do you think of becoming her pupil? Zuo shook and instantly reacted. Bowing his head to Shi Feng Rong he said, this disciple greets master. Entering fourth Shirgu's line, it was the best possible outcome for him. His skills laid in farming and that is very beneficial for making Dan. The demands of Ling herbs in making Dan were very large. Stand. Shi Feng Rong said lightly, her voice sounding like her usual iciness. Zuo obediently stood. Shimmy, in the future, he'll be in your care. Pei Yuan Ran said solemnly. Shixiang, don't worry. I definitely wouldn't conceal any of my knowledge. But if he isn't willing to put any effort in, Shixiang cannot blame me. Shi Feng Rong's cold words were like a basin of ice-cold water that instantly woke Zuo from his joy. He suddenly had a bad feeling. The implication in Master's words made him feel apprehensive. Pei Yuan Ran nodded his head and spoke, this is good, turning to ask Zuo, do you have any questions? Zuo shook his head rapidly to show he didn't have any more questions. Originally, he had wanted to ask if he could ask second Shirshu if he had any questions about forging. He suddenly remembered at the snow-white sword essence that tortured him countless times, and made him want to die, that it originated from Xian Yen Shishu. The words that reached his mouth instantly shrunk back. He felt that he was crazy. Why would he ever have such a stupid idea? Wasn't that walking straight into a trap? Pu Yao was still in his consciousness. After his fright dissipated, his brain instantly recovered its clarity. He felt that in the future, he had to be a bit more careful. He might be an inner sect disciple now, but if Pu Yao was exposed, he was certain that the first reaction of Xian Yen Shishu was to cut him up along with Pu Yao. Subdue Yao and exterminate Mo. That was too terrifying. Even though he was not as terrified as he used to be when facing that sword essence, but that was only in his consciousness. In the real world, one blow from Xian Yen Shishu's sword was enough to tear him into countless pieces. Pu Yao might be arrogant in front of Sui Mo, but Pu Yao estimated if he had to face Xian Yen Shishu, he would also be killed instantly. He still remembered the scene when Xian Yan's sword cleaved the Black Sea. Pei Yuan Ran detected Sui Mo's nervousness but didn't put any importance on it. Which disciple in their sect didn't tremble when they saw the masters? The sect leader and the Shishu were all very busy. Even though it was a delight that Sui Mo became a ling plant farmer, but the Shishu wouldn't spend too much time on this matter. The sect leader gave a few more words of encouragement and then left with the other Shishu. Shi Feng Rong moved away gracefully and Sui Mo hurried to catch up. Shi Feng Rong didn't turn her head back and said, seemingly to herself, I have warned you, but in the end, you choose the road to walk. Since you are now my disciple, I naturally will have my demands. Your private matters, I will not interfere, but what I order to be done, you have to complete it. Following behind, Sui Mo's heart almost jumped out of his chest as he answered, yes. Go attend to your own matters. After a few days, I will send someone to find you, Shi Feng Rong said. Sui Mo carefully saw his master away, his heart very depressed. It seemed that his master wasn't easy to interact with. Returning to his little yard, he found the outside was full of people. Almost all the outer sect disciples were waiting for him. Aiya, Shixiang's back. I had said it before, with Shixiang's talents, wouldn't getting an inner sect position be easy? Shixiang, this is a small token of little brother's regard. Not enough to pay respects, Shixiang, don't look down. Sui Mo's head swelled up. Originally, he had prepared to reject the gifts, but noticing the worried glances of these people, he accepted the various gifts. As expected, when they saw him accept the gifts, these outer sect disciples all gave expressions of joy. Knowing that they would disturb Sui Mo, they only gave their congratulations and stayed for a short while before leaving. The little yard finally returned to its normal silence. Releasing a breath, Sui Mo held a large pile of various gifts as he walked into the yard and put the gifts down. This entire day today was so fantastical. Taking out the spring sprout jade metal, he gently caressed it, feeling the fineness and smoothness of the jade metal. His body was very tired but his mental state was still excited. The sect leader had divided an entire mountain valley to him. Even though part of it was due to his ling plant farmer profession, but this kind of benefits was still very generous. Other than Wei Xing Shixiang, it probably would be him that had the best benefits. Suddenly remembering the jade box that he had buried in the ling vein of the seclusion room, he instantly became alert. Quickly running to the seclusion room, carefully digging out the jade box, he opened it for a look. The gold ore had disappeared as expected, and the black gold worm had clearly changed. There was a new additional mark on the pure black shell similar to a coin, extremely eye-catching. Sui Mo ran into his sea of consciousness. Pu Yao was sitting on the gravestone, listening to the sound tablet. He didn't even blink an eyelid. Shrouded in the black clouds, the red rhombus-shaped jewel was alluring and attractive. After last time, Pu Yao had continued to maintain this attitude. He seemed like a completely different person than before. Pu, has this black good worm reached 4th level? Suemo tried his best to make his tone as friendly as possible. 5 pieces of second-grade jingsha. Pu reached out a palm. As expected. When did this guy become even more greedy than he was? Suemo didn't get it. Almost all of his jingsha ended up in Pu Yao's wallet, yet he hadn't found Pu Yao using the jingsha for anything. Pu Yao was like a bottomless hole that ate jingsha. Supposedly Yao could eat souls. However, compared to just a lianqi cultivator, Yao Ma was an insurmountably strong and incredibly distant entity. What function did eating souls have, only ghosts would know. In the future, he should go to the records in the sect where it was possible to find some traces. In any case, now that he was an inner sect disciple, the records in the sect were open to him. But right now, he could only comply. Okay. Suemo gritted his teeth and decided to spend the money. When his voice landed, 5 pieces of jingsha disappeared from his wallet. On this point, Pu Yao was much better than before. He would never take extra. Yes. Pu Yao spat out a word. Glee rose in Suemo's heart. He remembered that Pu Yao had said that 4th-grade black gold worms were able to find ling veins. How do I get it to find ling veins? 50 pieces of 2nd-grade jingsha. Pu Yao made an outrageous demand without even raising an eyelid. Suemo was dumbstruck. After a moment, he gave a wail, "You're killing me." This was definitely premeditated. Suemo only had 52 pieces of jingsha remaining. He hadn't thought that Pu Yao's opening quote was his entire wealth. Pu Yao disregarded Suemo's struggle, "I increase the amount by 10 jingsha every day." Suemo almost spat blood, but Pu Yao was at a complete advantage. Suemo had no other choice. Gritting his teeth, he said fiercely, "Fine. If it's 50, then 50 it is." Clink, clink, clink. The sound of jingsha moving was extremely clear. Pu Yao was doing it on purpose. Suemo's teeth itched in hate, but he didn't have any solution. An enormous benefit was enticing him. If the black gold worm really could find ling veins, it would be nothing less than a long-term benefit for him. Finding ling veins, he could then create high-grade ling fields. Adding on his techniques as a ling plant farmer, no matter what he planted, it was certain that there was more profit to be made. Right now, he was an inner sect disciple. If he could find a new ling vein, other than giving up a portion to the sect, the large majority would still land in his pocket. Jingsha was one of the factors of strength, especially when he had at his side a money-grubbing Yao Ma like Pu Yao. Pu Yao threw a spell fragment at him. This spell allowed him to control ling worms, and it was very short and easy to learn. Suemo easily learnt the spell in a short amount of time. Suemo treated the worm like treasure. If his own yard had a small section of ling veins, it was possible there were more ling veins in the Wukong Mountains. Every section of ling veins were very valuable, even the thinnest ling vein. Even though West Wind Valley had been assigned to him, but ling fields, especially high-grade ling fields, were in short supply. Just his master's place, it needed large amounts of ling fields to support. The price of high-grade materials were just way too expensive. He had started to try to engage in business. The benefits of a ling plant farmer was pretty good, but it wasn't as fast at earning jingsha like other kinds of shoja. The little section of ling vein in the seclusion room had disappeared already. Suemo speculated that it disappeared due to the black gold worm absorbing all of the ling energy. Even though he had meditated there for a long time, the ling veins hadn't been affected at all. It must have been that he was in lianqi, and the amount of ling energy he absorbed each time he meditated was a pitiful amount, so the ling veins hadn't been affected. In the process of the black gold worm increasing its grade, it needed too much ling energy and in the end, caused the ling vein to disappear. However, this caused the last regret in Suemo's heart to disappear. The most valuable thing in this entire yard was this section of ling vein. He decided to go take a look at West Wind Valley. West Wind Valley was located between 3 peaks, but as none of the three peaks were high, the sunlight that streamed into the valley was plentiful. Compared to the coldness and humidity in Cold Mist Valley, this place was much warmer and welcoming. Holding the copper medal the sect leader had given, Zhuo carefully avoided the Jinji along the road. The Jinji in this place wasn't as strict as Cold Mist Valley but far beyond anything that a Zhuji cultivator could content, much less the little Lianqi cultivator that Zhuo was. But his spiritual power just had to be much stronger than the typical Lianqi, so the pressure he felt from the Jinji was much stronger than normal Shouja. Carefully passing through the Jinji, he could see this was much more desolate than Cold Mist Valley. The geography of the valley was very flat. There was only a patch of about 20 mu of ling fields. Based on the looks, it seemed to be third grade. Even though the weeds were growing all around, but there were still people who came to this 20 mu of ling fields at intervals to take care of it. The grade hadn't dropped. 20 mu of ling fields wasn't very much, but this 20 mu of ling fields was going to become his personal property. The entire West Wind Valley was going to become his private property. In here, he could do whatever he wanted. This benefit was very generous. Looking at the ling energy encapsulated in the ling fields, and the enormous mountain valley that belonged to him, a feeling of satisfaction rose. The only regret Zhuo had was that there wasn't a waterfall here. If there was a small waterfall, it would be perfect. Looking at the old trees and weeds in the surroundings, his heart suddenly moved. Taking out the black gold worm from his bosom, he casted the spell. The black god worm spread out on the ground and started to slowly crawl. Since this place belonged to him, then if he explored it, it should be very reasonable. Honk honk honk. Zhuo's strange gong-like laugh echoed through West Wind Valley. Chapter 35 Discovery. The black gold worm, once it landed on the ground, was motionless. After a while, the antennas started to wave, reaching out in every direction. No wonder it was a fourth-grade black gold worm. Zhuo praised it silently. This kind of intelligence was not something normal ling worms would have. The black gold worm raised its head after a while. The two antennas in the front slightly shook as it quickly crawled along the ground. It sometimes stopped or sometimes slowly proceeded. Zhuo carefully casted the control spell, tightly following the worm from behind, not daring to relax his watch even slightly. Other than the ling fields, various weeds dominated all other areas of the valley. This created some difficulties for Zhuo. He took out the ice crystal sword that Shixiang had given him to cut out a path. Grasping the translucent ice crystal sword in his hand, it gave off a kind of bone-aching cold. The good thing was the blade was extremely sharp and pretty good at cutting up grass and wood. Suddenly, the black good worm stopped but then went at an even faster speed. It went deep into the grass-covered land. Zhuo instantly became alert. Carrying the icy crystal sword, he followed right after. The black gold worm stopped in front of a protruding rock. Following closely behind, Zhuo narrowed his eyes and started to examine this large piece of rock. The rock was a normal granite, about 50 or 60 feet tall. From the outside, there was nothing special about it. Was the mystery located inside the rock? In any case, this place was his own private one. It didn't matter how he played with it. Lifting up the ice crystal sword, he started to dig at the rock. Granite might be hard, but facing a third-grade flying sword, it was like tofu. In a short while, Zhuo dug out a large hole. As expected, the black gold worm climbed into the hole. This caused Zhuo to be even more motivated, his hand moving faster. This rock was even bigger than he had imagined. When he dug for more than an hour, and it was 70 or 80 feet deep, it still hadn't reached the bottom. In the end, Zhuo wasn't one of those that cultivated the body. His two arms seemed to be filled with lead, his entire body almost falling apart. No way, it's killing me. He collapsed on the ground, panting as he looked dispiritedly at the black gold worm lying on the bottom of the hole. Bro, you are really obsessed. Gu can't do it, need to sleep first. He grimaced at the black gold worm. Finishing, he fell into a deep sleep in the hole he had just dug. When Zuoyamo opened his eyes, he saw a patch of blackness. Sitting up, the moonlight came in through the opening of the hole. The inside of the hole was slightly illuminated. The black gold worm was still silently motionless at the bottom of the hole, the gold coin on its back releasing a faint gold light in the dark of the rock hole. It was already night. Zuoyamo drifted off into his thoughts for a while before he took up the ice crystal sword again. Brother, let us continue. Ding ding, dong dong. The continuous sound of a sword cutting rocks rang inside West Wind Valley. Zuoyamo continued to dig mechanically straight down until the sky was almost filled with light. Zuoyamo suddenly felt the icy crystal sword in his hand had cut into empty space. His heart instantly jumped, his exhaustion swept away. Putting power into his hands, he quickly cut out the last thin piece of rock. Behind the rock was a large black hole. Zuoyamo's heart couldn't help but beat wildly. The black gold worm didn't hesitate. Flashing into the black hole, it quickly vanished. Zuoyamo forced himself to swallow his spit and he hesitated for a moment before holding the ice crystal sword and squeezing into the black hole. The black hole was much deeper than he had imagined. As he went deeper, his heart became heavier. There were clear signs of human cutting in here, but it would have been long ago since there was a strong moldy odor in the cave. Who had made a dwelling here? Was this the tomb of one of the sex elders? This guess made him very excited. He walked quickly into the deeper regions. There was a thin connection being maintained between him and the black gold worm. He was able to know things about the situation ahead. Very quickly, he saw the black gold worm. In the darkness, the gold coin mark of the black gold worm could be seen from far away. The black gold worm was spread out over a lump, unwilling to leave. Zuoyamo scanned the surroundings. This was a very crude stone room. There was a spring in the corner, a stone desk, a stone bed, and nothing else. When he went closer, Zuoyamo was frightened out of his wits. The black gold worm was actually on a pile of bones. Zuoyamo's heartbeat increased. His mouth became dry, he resisted the great terror inside himself and walked for a closer look. He didn't know whose remains these were. It was spread out on the ground. From the appearance, it seemed to have been a long time ago. He looked around. His eyes suddenly became dumbstruck and then he showed a joyous expression. This was the death place of one of the sex elders. With the fastest speed possible, he picked up the various jade sticks and talismans on the ground. He seemed like an extremely hungry beggar who suddenly saw bread. There weren't many talismans, and it had been too long since they were supported with Ling energy, their functions were almost entirely gone. In comparison, there were many more jade sticks, about 20 or so. He explored every corner, not leaving anything behind before Zuoyamo's eyes once again went back to the pile of bones. The black gold worm was lying on that pile of bones, motionless, but the gold coin mark on the back seemed slightly brighter. To have died here, it definitely was his sex elders. He had received such a big convenience from them. Pondering for a second, Zuoyamo bowed 3 times to the pile of bones and then lightly buried the bones in a corner. Moving away the bones, Zuoyamo found that there was actually a prayer mat underneath the bones. Prayer mat. He blanked. This white mat, it was almost the same as the mat that the nameless Shixiang had left behind in the seclusion room at Zuoyamo's little yard. He hurriedly poured out the jade sticks that he had put away in front of him. One by one, he poured Ling energy in. After a while, he managed to generally understand the cause and effect. This rock room was the death place of an elder in the sect, but this elder was actually an outer sect disciple. What Zuoyamo felt even more unimaginable was that this was the elder who had always been an outer sect disciple but almost managed to enter Jindan, who was also the previous owner of Zuoyamo's little yard. The matters of the world were just this fantastical. Suemo dumbly sat there and couldn't help but sigh. This Shixiang, called Wei Nan, was an outer sect disciple from 300 years ago. He had a special ability. He was naturally sensitive to Ling veins. So he could find that weak Ling vein, build the little yard and painstakingly cultivate her. Even though he had the help of the Ling vein, but he didn't have good talent at cultivating and just barely kept up with the other disciples. He had great ambitions and didn't want to live a mediocre life. He racked his brains and thought of all kinds of methods. In many places, Wei Nan Shixiang was extremely similar to Suemo. Wei Nan also chose Ling plant farmer as his best path to riches. However, his talents in the area of the 5 elements were not as good as Suemo's, and it took him 5 long years before he barely became a Ling plant farmer. But Wei Nan didn't tell anyone else. From then on, he started to learn how to make dan, yet his talents in making dan was also average. After spending 10 years, he finally managed to make his first 4th grade Ling dan. He developed slowly in cultivation, yet his talent developed rapidly. He was even able to detect the Ling veins buried deep underground. When he was 37, he found this Ling vein. Afraid that the sect would take it away if they knew, he quietly created this rock room. Taking advantage of the Ling veins, he finally reached Ningmai at 40 years of age. At this time, he was still an outer sect disciple. Wei Nan was extremely talented at concealment and pretense. No one in the sect managed to find that his cultivation had risen to Ningmai. Due to the fact that his potential truly was too average, he was afraid that his Ningmai cultivation would cause the elders in the sect to be suspicious and from that, find the sect of the Ling veins. He was satisfied with seclusion. After painstaking management through the years, he had some measure of wealth. He continuously purchased all kinds of jade sticks. What he learned was extremely broad and mixed. He didn't know what caused it, but in that period of time, the progression of his Ling energy became faster. He was extremely happy and put even more effort into collecting all kinds of jade sticks. The more odd the jade stick, the more he was obsessed. And no matter how strange the jade stick, he would always try it out. When he had reached 50 years old, the number of spells and scriptures he needed to practice each day reached 15 kinds. At that time, he knew he had no hope of entering Jindan and killed off his dream. In the following 20 years, he started to organize and study the variety of odd jade sticks and scriptures that he had collected. His cultivation was limited, but his scope of knowledge and spells was very wide. There weren't many that could compare to him. In addition, he had cultivated many of the unpopular scriptures for a few decades and had many conclusions. Comparing the different scriptures, he finally managed to finish the summary and organization of all the types of scriptures he had collected through his lifetime. In total, there were 20 sticks. No name, nothing too profound. It was the last thing he left in this world. Carefully putting away the jade sticks that were on the ground, Suemo was full of respect for this elder Wei Nan. He lifted the mat, went to the spring and carefully poured water over to wash it. Even though so many years had passed, after a gentle wash, the mat once again recovered its snowy white appearance. This mat wasn't something ordinary. It was made from meditation grass and its effect was to calm the heart. It wouldn't decay, won't have worms for hundreds of years. It was much rarer than the mat from the little yard. He put the mat back in its original spot and sat on it. A thick Ling energy seemed to pour in through his skin. He quickly entered mediation and became motionless. Beside the mat, the black gold worm was also motionless, abnormally quiet. Only the gold coin mark on the back flashed with a gold light. When he woke up from meditation, Suemo couldn't disguise the ecstasy in his eyes. This Ling vein, compared to the Ling vein in his little yard, was much greater. If the Ling vein in the seclusion room of the little yard could be said to be a small branch, then this Ling veins was like the stem. The abundant Ling energy made one unconsciously comfortable. With such a high-quality Ling vein, he could quickly enter Zhuji. He had decided, in the future, this would be his secluded cultivation room. When Zuemo squeezed out of the rock hole, the blinding sun outside made him unconsciously narrow his eyes. Turning and carefully covering up the hole, he scattered the granite that he had dug out into the weeds. Nothing could be seen. After finishing, he released a breath. Just at this time, Liang Feng came looking for him with other people. Because there wasn't any buildings in West Wind Valley, if Zuemo was going to live inside the valley, then it required building a house. She was naturally in charge of this kind of matter and personally came to ask about Zuemo's preferences and needs. After attentively listening to Zuemo's demands, she waved her hands and the other outer sect disciples instantly started to move. In half a day, a little yard was built. Zuemo named it the Little West Wind Yard. The Little West Wind Yard became his new home. Chapter 36 Encounter Again. The Little West Wind Yard became one of the important places in Wukong Sword Sect, especially for outer sect disciples. Its importance far surpassed the residences of all other inner sect disciples. The great majority of outer sect disciples farmed, and what they were most afraid of were problems in the Ling fields. Having a Ling plant farmer in the sect, they felt more secure. At least when a problem occurred now, they knew they could find someone. A brand new yard appeared in the valley. The outside walls were constructed from limestone. The fine patterns and the cool hardness of the limestone added a few hints of serenity and peace. The vines were like a waterfall, the stars in the sky occasionally reflecting, glittering and speckled. The pond in the yard wasn't the mud pond in his previous residence. First-grade purple fire lotus were planted in the pond. The purple lotus flowers were like purple flames that were burning in the water. In the night, they would release a hazy purple light. Between the purple fire lotuses, the silver scissor fish swam happily. It was like countless blades crashing together, dozens of silver lines intersecting, blinding to the eye. Zuemo wasn't in the mood to admire the beautiful scenery. Just like before, he would go to Cold Mist Valley at the same time every day to make rain and take care of the plants. Now that he was an inner sect disciple, the rule that it was not allowed to fly inside the mountain was not valid for him. Putting on the spirit traveling seal, each of his steps was a small flight. His speed wasn't slower than those flying steeds. Other than saving a lot of time, he enjoyed the process very much. These days, during the daytime, he was like normal as he cared for the Ling fields. At night, he would quietly run to the Ling vein in the rock room to meditate and practice embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. Even though the primary purpose of embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation was to cultivate the spirit, but the increase in Ling energy was also pretty good and much better than 10 principle scripture. Adding on the help of the Ling vein, after a few days, his progress was astounding. Without him detecting it, his cultivation quietly broke through to the 9th level of Lianqi. The Ling vein in the rock room became Zuomo's biggest secret other than Puyao. He was especially careful. In order to disguise the opening, he just didn't use a piece of granite to seal the entrance, he also planted large amounts of weeds and shrubs around the opening. From the outside, there was nothing that could be detected. His only worry was that elders like his master or the sect leader would come here, so he didn't dare to put out any jinji. With his skill, the jinji he would create would be completely ineffective against the sect leader and the other and would arouse their attention instead. His days were extremely leisurely. Other than the provision of jingsher each month, there was also a provision of Ling grains. He had planted Ling grains for 2 years yet had never ate it before. The Ling grains were filled with rich Ling energy. And when it was absorbed, it was extremely gentle, unlike the forceful nature of the Ling energy absorbed from the jingsher, and used if one had to go to some special places like Bloody Heaven Metropolis Jia. 3,000 years ago, Yaoma were defeated. In order to preserve their strength, the last remaining 100 or so great powers of the Yaoma, using their own bodies and blood as the guide, as 7 medium Jia as the axis, 49 little Jia as the screen to create Bloody Sky Metropolis Jia and stop the Xiuzha in their steps. Inside Bloody Sky Metropolis Jia, all of the Ling energy became extremely unrefined and unordered. Xiuzha basically had no way of absorbing it. Those that traveled to Bloody Sky Metropolis Jia, they always needed to bring large amounts of Jingshi and Ling grains. Jingshi was used to replenish the normal usage of Ling energy, but due to the fact that the Ling energy in Jingshi was extremely strong, relying only on Jingshi could easily cause the cultivation to collapse. While the Ling energy in the Ling grains were not as potent as it was in Jingshi, but it was gentle and could help Xiuzha stabilize their cultivation. The disciples in some large sects would use Ling grains every day to increase the speed of cultivation. But for a small sect like Wukong Sword Sect, they would only provide a certain amount each month. And it was only low-grade Ling grains. But even just first-grade Ling grains, Zuo had never eaten any before. Zuo was presently studying the jade sticks that Elder Wei Nan had left. Even though Elder Wei Nan's cultivation had been limited, but many of the roads he had walked were worthy for Zuo to use as reference, such as farming. Elder Wei Nan had been a Ling plant farmer, and had learned how to make dan. How similar was that to Zuo? Zuo hadn't thought to touch the obscure scriptures yet. How to earn Jingshi, it was what he needed to think about right now. What was easiest to earn Jingshi within Lianqi? What to plant? Finally getting 20 mu of third-grade Ling fields, Zuo naturally wanted to organize it well. Right now, he had no money, completely wrung dry by Pu Yao. The allowance from the sect each month wasn't an insignificant amount, but for him, it was just a drop in the bucket. Things like Ling veins couldn't be converted directly to Jingshi. But even if it was possible to sell it, Zuo definitely wouldn't sell it. To surrender long-term benefits for short-term gains, how would such a shrewd person like him do such a stupid thing? Thinking of ways to earn Jingshi was one of the most important matters of Wei Nan. Actually, for every single Xiuzha, Jingshi was a problem that couldn't be avoided. The amount of Jingshi earned directly influenced the speed of cultivation. Talismans, jade sticks, materials. What didn't require Jingshi? Even though Zuo was now an inner sect disciple and the sect would put effort into nurturing him and give him conveniences in each area, but it was limited. But compared to Zuo's circumstances, Wei Nan's past circumstances were much more difficult. The paths that he had explored were extremely worth of reference to Zuo sitting on the gray-beaked goose that the sect had given him. Zuo took big and small pouches as he sat idly on the goose's back. These things, all of them were what others had given him which he couldn't use. He planned on turning all of it into Jingshi. Even though it really wouldn't be a lot, but right now he had no other way. Hoping that Pu Yao could spit out some Jingshi, that was impossible. Pu Yao always sat with his eyes closed on the gravestone every day. He seemed to be meditating. Did he need to cultivate too? Zuo was very curious. Right now, he wouldn't actively interact. Pu Yao's mood was fickle, ruthless and crazy. Yet his power was extremely deep. This kind of person, you never knew what his next step would be, you never could guess what he was thinking inside, you also never would know what his true aims were. Zuo felt that Pu Yao was a true devil. He would give you enticements that made your soul shake, and just when you are enjoying it to the limit, you would fall to the lowest level of hell. The torments Pu Yao gave him, Zuo had hated, had raged, had felt hopeless. But when Master had said that his features had been changed and his mind erased, these emotions that had troubled him dissipated like smoke. Because he needed power. Because he needed answers. These petty torments, what was it really? He clearly remembered the unfamiliarity he felt when he first woke up 2 years ago. In these 2 years, the voice that appeared in his dreams tormented him countless times. He had been afraid, terrified, hesitant, uncertain. He had thought of trying to find answers but had no clues. There was nothing he could do. So he muddled his way through the days and was never happy. Right now, he was awake. He only had one thought. He needed to find the answer. Who? Who did all this? Unable to be forgiven. On the back of the gray-beaked goose, Suemo looked at Dong Fu appearing through the clouds. He tightened his fist. Dong Fu was the same as usual, people streaming. Suemo headed straight for the free market and found Fu Jin. Fu Jing's eyes were extremely sharp. Seeing the spring sprout jade metal on Suemo's waist, his entire person blanked. After a while, he recovered. Even though shock still remained in his eyes, but he piled a smile on his face. Congratulations little Mo Gu, little Mo Gu. TSK, such a young Ling plant farmer, little Mo Gu is definitely extraordinary. Come in, come in. Suemo didn't waste pleasantries. With a bang, he threw the large bag at Fu Jin. Sell these things for me. What things? Fu Jin asked as his hands rapidly opened the cloth bag. With just one sweep, he could generally determine the value of these things. There were many items but they weren't valuable. It was actually normal. The Lianqi outer sect disciples, they couldn't give anything valuable. His brain moved rapidly and quoted a generous price, 50 pieces of second-grade jinsher. How about it? Suemo knew the market. These things definitely wasn't worth 50 pieces of second-grade jinsher. He shook his head, too much, 30 pieces is good. All right. Fu Jin briskly handed over the jinsher and put away the items. With a smile, he said, now that little Mo Gu has flourished, don't forget to support this little brother. The two chatted a bit more. Suemo listened very carefully. Don't estimate the kind of small business people like Fu Jin. Their intuition was extremely sensitive. Any movements in the market couldn't be concealed from their eyes. Between the words, Fu Jin was extremely worries. Recently, the price of the Ling grains was continuously rising. This was the first time it had occurred in the recent years. Each year, people would go to Bloody Sky Metropolis to hunt Yao, but the price of Ling grains had never been as exaggerated as this. Connecting it to the recent rumors about Bloody Sky Metropolis, it made people worried. According to Fu Jin, it wasn't just Tian Yu Jia. The price of Ling grains in all the other Jia were continuously rising. All of this clearly showed that the conflict in Bloody Sky Metropolis was become even more intense. Was the Yaomua starting the counterattack? After hearing Fu Jin's words, Suemo's heart became slightly heavier. For low-level Xiuzhi, the greatest danger was turmoil. If a great war like the one 3,000 years ago started, low-level Xiuzhi was the cannon fodder that would die the quickest. Ho, it's really a small world, fate lets enemies meet. A strange voice interrupted Suemo's musing. He raised his head and a headache started. The two people in front of him, one of them was the Dong Qi sword sect disciple whose flying sword had been cracked by him the last time. The person at the side was very unfamiliar. It probably was his Shixiang. His presence was even greater. Fu Jin was extremely perceptive. Seeing the situation, he instantly felt bitter inside but pushed a smile on his face. Sirs, come. Everyone sit down and drink some tea, pa. The voice instantly stopped. Fu Jin was thrown flying like a sandbag. Trash. Is there space for you to talk here? The other took away his hand and said icily. Suemo hadn't thought the other would start punching right away. He hadn't managed to react in time. He hurriedly ran over to support Fu Jin. Looking at the hand mark on the face and the blood spilling from the corner of Fu Jing's mouth, Suemo's eyes became dark. He carefully helped Fu Jin up and then slowly turned around. Who was so stupid and let their dog out? Suemo stared at the one that had moved, his finger caressing the gold sword ring. That guy's face instantly became flushed. In a rage, the voice suddenly stopped. A sword energy, carrying a faint cloud of frost energy, pointed straight at his forehead. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.